Okay, good morning. Welcome to day two. Before I start, I'd just like to thank Seaguard for the sponsorship last night of the bar. It's very much appreciated, and I'm sure we took full use of the amount that was put behind it. So thank you to Aaron, thank you to Callum. So it's much appreciated. Hope you all had a good night. Went to bed early. Say no more. So just to quickly cover what's on today. We start with the CMS presentation from Robin, Alisa and Jonathan, followed by Sarah from ScotGov, the TRSG report from Chris, the RPSG report from Anya, Decommissioning Working Group from Dan, from DCIT, Rob Willis, SFF, Elspeth McDonald, on an update for the SFF, MSG that was carried over from yesterday from Courtney and Reese, EC review from Steve, ICPC update from John on behalf of the General Manager of ICPC, Neil's legal update from CMS, AOB, just one item from Alistair from Indeximate, and date and venue next meeting. So, and then we close at 12:45, and lunch will be available in the same place as yesterday if you wish to stay. So sort of now to transfer it to CMS and Robin. So, and I'll just put your presentation up.
Thank you very much, Clive. And we were asked today to speak on the legal issues on how you deliver a subsea cable project. And I think Clive thought that after the free bar, starting the morning with a good stern lecture from a bunch of lawyers was probably the way to go. So here we are. There's three of us. We're not a jazz trio. We are three partners at CMS law firm. We do a lot of energy work. We do a lot in this space. I thought this looked simple. There's only two buttons, next and back. But still too complicated for me, it seems. While we're fixing that, so the way we thought we'd approach it, because we were asked to talk about legal issues on delivering a project, and actually there's a number of different legal issues, and we are finally sliced into different areas of specialism. So what we thought would be a good way of sort of just trying to package up everything we do at a high level would be to look at, there we go, perfect. To look at a subsea cable project from the perspective of the sort of end point, or perhaps not the end point, but a midpoint, where somebody with a lot of skin in the game, a bank or consortium of banks, says, yes, this project is ready to go. We can actually lend some money on it. In the same way when you're buying a house and the surveyor goes out and does the survey and says, yeah, this is something that is a mortgageable property. It needs to be watertight. It needs to have all the things a good house has, I don't know. But from our perspective, to get to the point where a consortium of banks is prepared to say, yes, this is a good bet, this can be lent on, this project is ready to go, it needs a package of things in place to get there. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about it perhaps with an electricity slant, although equally much of this applies to telecoms as well. And we're going to go through the sort of physical stuff, the land, the consent. We're going to talk about the commercial stuff, the contracts you need in place, the regulatory bits and pieces. And then John is going to close with talking about a bank's perspective and the sort of standards you need to get to in these things. So with that introduction out the way, I'm going to be the first of our trio to speak. I'm Robin Hutchison. I specialise in energy consents, and I head at CMS the Energy and Infrastructure Planning team. So I've spent the last 20 years or so trying to get together the packages of land, different consents needed for a variety of energy projects, but spent a lot in the under the sea. And in fact, just while I wait for the next slide, I'll tell you what my daughter said to me at breakfast this morning. She said, what are you doing today, Daddy? She's 11. And I said, oh, I'm speaking at a conference, the Subsea Cable Conference. She goes, oh, great, you should sing them Under the Sea from Finding Nemo. They'll like that. So I said I'm unlikely to have an opportunity to do that, but it's becoming more... I will crack on, regardless. Let's see. I'm clicking next. Is someone able just to flick on to the next slide? That would be great. They're not very exciting slides, actually, so I feel we're slightly overselling the content here. Oh. There we go, perfect. So, in terms of landing consents, and this isn't dissimilar to if you're, building a conservatory out the back of your house, and you need to go and speak to the planning department to get your planning permission, and you need to make sure that the ground you're building it on, you actually have the rights to do it. You're not straying into a neighbour's land. And for a subsea cable project, it's similar, just on a bigger scale. We need the consents in place. We don't necessarily need to have discharged all the nitty-gritty of conditions. Some of that will need to wait until contractors are appointed with that design detail. But we need to settle the principle so we're not going to get a planning refusal, and we need to have the land in place. So if we look back 10, 15 years, this was a less developed sector, and the approach was a lot more piecemeal. So if we look back to a project that I was involved in 10 years ago, and in fact I just spoke to the project director who is here today, Morris, they moved on to the Crown Estate, IFA 2. We built up that project through a sort of piecemeal package of different consents, whereas these days, fast forward a decade, interconnectors, subsea cable projects, and other things like OFTOs connecting offshore wind farms and other types of similar projects are commonplace. We've got strong national government policy support describing these types of projects as a critical national priority. And what this does is it gives projects of this nature a different status in the way they're getting consented and the way we're going through the process. So rather than sort of approaching lots of different bodies, planning authorities, like you would if you wanted the conservatory we talked about earlier, you can apply directly, in England anyway, in England and Wales, to the Secretary of State for a development consent order, which is basically a law, and the law will provide you with all the rights, powers that you need to deliver your project. It's a bit of an ordeal. I'm in the middle of one of the processes just now, which is why I've got bags under my eyes. It's got nothing to do with the free bar. But it's certain, and you know when you get to the end of it, the result you will achieve. It could be a bit more expensive, but it's an interesting option, and that's what we're seeing the majority, certainly in the electricity space, of interconnectors going down. I was going to talk about exempt submarine cables, which is a super geeky issue for planning lawyers, but I'll not use the time. But if anyone wants to talk to me about exempt submarine cables, happy to do so at the coffee break. The final point here is that you'll notice I'm talking UK, and for an interconnector project or subsea cable project, there's going to be another end to it. And so one of the other things we need to do is align what we're doing in the UK with the end point, other country, to make sure that the landing consents are gelled together so that everybody gets everything they need at the same time. And we've done projects going to Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Ireland, and everybody, there's familiarities, but everybody's a little bit different. So it's really important to work out how those two things will mesh at the beginning. What are the issues that you'll face in trying to pull together the landing consents for, or the consents for a interconnector or subsea cable project? A lot of this comes down to congestion. There are a lot more projects trying to land in similar places than there used to be. And this creates issues for who's going to snap up the land first. It creates issues for competition. The response to this is a policy push towards coordination, and I know we heard a bit about coordination yesterday, and I think we'll hear more about it today, but there's a strong policy driver now for projects to be working together. So you're not just trying to put together the package to deliver your own scheme, you're trying to coordinate the construction with somebody else. More projects means more angry neighbours, so we're seeing legal challenges, and there's a greater level of sophistication in those challenges. So it's a busy old place, the foreshore. As well as consents, I said at the beginning we need our consents, and we need our land. Traditional way, voluntary agreements, but what we're seeing now as the standard is to back a campaign of trying to obtain land rights by discussion to backing up with a compulsory purchase order, which means that you can guarantee that the entire package of land rights required for a project can be obtained, although there are tests to go through, and it does mean that you still need to have shown that you've tried to engage with landowners. But from the project financing perspective, you can get to the end of the process and say, I've got my consents, and I've got my compulsory acquisition, which means I can acquire the full suite of land rights that I need. I'm not going to hold myself out as a telecoms lawyer. In my team, we do have telecom specialists, but I'll just make a point that although I've been speaking mainly through a sort of electricity lens, similar points apply to a telecoms project as well. You need the package of consents, you need the land rights, and equivalent, although slightly different powers apply in relation to land, code rights, and compulsory acquisition. So, you've got your project, you've got your land, you've got your consents. What next? Ailsa will tell us.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Robin. So when we talk about the bankability of a project, there is an immediate tension between the employer, and by that I mean the client who is commissioning the project, whose asset it's ultimately going to be, the contractor who's delivering the asset, and the regulator. Now, of course, the regulator is not party to any of the contracts, but the regulator is, at least in the UK, performs a really important role, because the regulator is telling the employer that this asset has to be delivered and when it has to be delivered. And against that regulatory backdrop, there will be constraints and costs and some penalties imposed upon the client or the employer. So the employer is going to look to back those off to the extent it can in some of its contracts with the contractor. And the contractor wants to deliver the asset, get paid, get commissioned, and have as short a defects notification period, rectification period as possible, whereas the employer wants to have the asset delivered on time, on budget, have it fully functioning. So you can see immediately that when we are drafting and negotiating these contracts, there's a bit of competing priorities. So in terms of bankability, when we talk about the contract here, the form of contract that we see most often is the FIDIC form of contract, which is usually heavily amended. And it's amended because what we're trying to do is we're looking at risks and risk allocation between the parties involved. And when you're looking at the bankability of a project, what we're trying to do is allocate the risks to the party who is best able to manage those risks. So typical risks that are allocated contractually to the employer are access. So if a contractor needs to get access to deliver his project, it would expect that the employer will secure all the rights of access that it needs. Permits, Robin's talked about the permit and consenting regime. There'll be some permits that the contractor has to get, and there'll be some that the employer has to get, and the contract should set that out. There'll be some site data that's provided that the contractor will want to rely upon and reflect that in its design. And then, of course, everybody wants to get paid. From the contractor's perspective, contractually, what we would look at as key risks that are allocated to the contractor, ultimately, the design and the construction of the cables. We would expect that the contractor takes the risks that relate to the provision of all of the goods, all of the consumables, and all of the equipment that necessitates. And permits, again, can't keep mentioning permits enough, but there'll be some permits that the contractor has to comply with. The contractor will be responsible for commissioning, and usually there's quite a lot of negotiation around about commissioning and testing, what that means. The contractor wants as short a period as possible. The employer wants a longer period, inevitably. And another area which is heavily negotiated is defects and defects provisions because of those competing tensions that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of offshore issues, cable burial techniques, there was a lot of mention of this yesterday, so the tools that are used, depth of cover, methods of protection. These are important to the employer because the employer wants to know, and the funder wants to know, that the project can be delivered on time. So you guys know way more about this than I do, but the reality is that certain methods of burial can be quicker than others. So a funder will typically interrogate those methods and look to see that the programme for the project is deliverable and that there's not going to be any delays, because delays equal cost and cost equals risk from a funder's perspective. Unexploded ordnance, typically that will not be a contractor risk, that would be an employer risk. Weather and vessels interconnected, but also a risk here. A funder will interrogate the programme for delivery of the project to the extent that weather impacts programme and that be an additional cost. They will look to see that the programme is achievable, look at any potential for delays and weather windows. And a funder will also look quite carefully about availability and performance regime, and there can be an interplay here with the point I mentioned earlier regarding the regulatory backdrop, because certainly in the UK, electricity companies face penalties from Ofgem if they have an asset which underperforms. And obviously crossing agreements are key as well. Onshore issues, Robin's touched on a lot of the permitting issues. Access to land, similar, will be an employer risk. We've all mentioned over the last couple of days that it's a pretty crowded place for some of these projects to be delivered. So increasingly, we're looking at contractors having to deal with the interface with multiple projects with others onshore. So the regulatory backdrop is absolutely fundamental when you're financing a project. The regulated route for interconnectors in the UK is a cap and floor mechanism. So that basically takes into, it's a 25-year look at a project and the funding of it with a cap and a floor set for the expected revenue that could be generated. If the revenue generated doesn't reach the floor, then the employer will be paid, or the investor will be paid, the difference between the floor and the actual revenue, and to the extent it exceeds the cap, it will have to repay some of the funding. So what that means is that the money is coming from the regulator, which ultimately comes from the consumer, which is why the regulatory backdrop is so important. And every 5 years, that mechanism is calculated. And the reason that we have that mechanism is to help incentivise the development of interconnectors to remove some of the electricity market price risk. So that's something that a funder will look at very closely. And finally, connections, pretty obvious, but if you're building an interconnector, you need to know that you can actually get your power, or you can get your telecoms connected onshore and onto the wider consumer network. So again, a funder will look very closely at grid connections and the availability of those. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague John, who will talk a bit more about the dark art of financing.
Right. I'm not going to rely too heavily on the slides, I don't think, because I'm hopeless at doing two things at once, so it's definitely going to crash if I try and do that. So I'm just looking out at that face, all those faces in the crowd going, this is not what you wanted to be doing at this time in the morning, so I'm going to keep this very, very short and as high level as I possibly can. There are a load of jurisdiction-specific issues associated with financing, particularly a subsea asset, whether that's electrical or fibre optic, and also the grant of security interests in different jurisdictions. But I just want to make it really clear that there are lots and lots of deals outside the UK that use English law to do their projects. So don't think just because you're not necessarily active in the UK that this has absolutely no relevance to you. banks love using English law for their agreements for various reasons. The UK is a very bank-friendly jurisdiction. Also, this isn't just relevant to deals which are financed at their outset. We would say that if your deal might be financed or refinanced in the future, possibly when the interest rate environment is a little bit more benign, which we hope it will be soon, then it's much easier structuring from the outset in a way that allows you to put finance in than trying to reverse engineer a financeable structure after the deal is done. I'm going to stick to project financing. We've done two different types of financing in the offshore space. We've done vendor financings where the seller of the kit effectively allows the person buying the kit to pay them down slowly, which is effectively a loan by any other name. Those are becoming probably a little less common. We did quite a few in the fibre optic space sort of pre-pandemic, but most of the suppliers of that kind of financing aren't that keen on doing it anymore. So I'm going to stick to project financing, but I'm also going to very, very quickly explain to you what I actually mean by that, because it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. I mean it is limited or no recourse financing, so the only recourse that the bank will have is to the project itself. It doesn't get security over any asset outside the security. It doesn't get a valuable guarantee from a very creditworthy entity. So it's the revenue stream of this particular project which repays the debt and provides the return to any sponsor. And in a default scenario, the solution for the lenders almost invariably will be to keep the project going and sell it as a going concern on the basis of its net present value. So what the lenders therefore want, there's a reason why I'm telling you that. Therefore, what the lenders want is certainty on costs, predictability as to revenue, the ability to protect and preserve the asset base, and also certainty about the regulatory regime, pretty much none of which a subsea project can deliver, of course, which makes this a big challenge, but also a great opportunity for lawyers and other advisors, I'm afraid to say, to solve an awful lot of issues for you. So what is it that makes limited recourse financing difficult? Well, usually it's long tenor debt, so there are only a few people who are prepared to provide it. There are relatively low margins, and there's very, very significant capex usually on these projects long before there's any income stream to repay the debt. And also the debt market is just getting more difficult. There's more and more regulation around it, and it becomes much more expensive to provide. Specific to subsea projects, the things that a lender will always have in the forefront of their mind is alternate capacity that's available. Are there any competing cables, and or for a telecoms deal, is there a competing satellite? There are generally no restrictive covenants in your deals, unlike, for example, accommodation deals, which makes them obviously susceptible to competition. Also, projects usually don't derive all of their revenue from committed sales contracts or indefeasible rights of use. You haven't usually pre-let 100% of the capacity to a creditworthy counterparty. So the banks are inevitably going to risk weight and discount your income models because they are exposed to an extent to some merchant risk, and they don't really like that. Also, these deals often throw off quite irregular income. There's an initial payment, but then quite small incremental payments along the way, which means it's quite hard for them to apply the kind of fiscal discipline that they would normally to a project, imposing financial covenants and distribution blocks and that kind of thing. It's a real challenge for them when they come and look at these deals. There's also generally no established secondary market for distressed deals in this area, as there probably are in some of the more mature asset classes that they are used to financing on this basis, some of which also have government or local government support. Additional things, while I'm mounting up problems for you specific to subsea projects, obviously there's construction risks. Those are understood and manageable, but obviously marine surveys and laying cable are weather dependent, and ready for service dates are often delayed. There are cost overruns on these projects, all things that banks hate. There is some technology risk. I won't overstate those. Obviously, people have been doing subsea cables since the 1840s. It's pretty well known, but there are technology risks, and also obviously there are maintenance risks. Cable systems can expect in a 20 to 25 year life to probably have 3 faults, but that's obviously on average. Some deals have no faults, some have faults every single year. There can be manufacturing faults, natural hazards, accidents, or even deliberate damage, all of which the banks want to risk assess, consider, and put into their overall sort of credit analysis when they're doing this. Finally, you've got permit and regulatory risks, which we've done to death, proprietary licenses, landing licenses, and approvals. And you've also got way leaves, etc., and operational permits that you need to worry about. And finally, there's political risk. pretty depressing tale, I appreciate, but there's also some good news, which is the US banking market and the UK banking market are both rallying hugely at the moment. I know post-Liz Truss, we've back to sort of 2007, 2008 interest rates, but they are slowly coming down. And also the volume of lending is going up massively and is expected to increase over the next 2-3 years in both of those markets. Also, private equity and infrastructure funds are increasingly interested in these deals, which throw off much better returns than some of the more mature asset classes. And funders are finding their way through all of these due diligence problems with the assistance of advisors, obviously. And finally, IFIs and ECAs are able to finance some of the riskier projects with much lower interest rates, but also much greater due diligence. So you should be aware of that. If you ever introduce an institution like that, it will probably slow down the deal a little bit. So to try and sort of gather that up, when we say you should think about how you structure your deal to start with, obviously you've got all the things that both Robin and Elsa talked about, but when we talk about a bankable structure, from the outset, we would say banks are very keen on insolvency remoteness. So you set up your project companies as insolvent remote SPVs. They have no other interest other than this project that you're doing. That's both the borrower and their immediate holding company. Because for various reasons, the easiest way for a bank to enforce over a project like this is to transfer the project company itself together with the debt on the basis of an insolvency remote share charge, rather than trying to move out individual assets. But I'm afraid to say they'll also want to take security over those individual assets. There's an array of different types of assets which they will want to get their hands on. And a diverse asset class, that's going to comprise electrical equipment, cables, real estate, contracts, bank accounts, insurance policies, all of these licenses and permits. So when you let your contracts, you need to think about including in them a clear right to be able to grant security over them. When you get a license, you need to worry about whether or not that's transferable, assignable, whether you can take security over it. You've also got to think about the geographical spread of those assets. You might be dealing with numerous legal jurisdictions, or indeed international waters where treaties apply rather than any particular legal system. And not all assets are transferable or assignable. These are all the things that a bank's going to be thinking about when it comes to look at a project. I am painfully aware that we are potentially... Are we over time? Am I over time? Sorry? I'm okay. So for a round-up, no, good. I don't want to be in trouble. I want to get invited back next year, so I don't want to get myself in a load of trouble here. So as I say, there's a huge number of things for a bank to think about when it's looking at one of these projects, a vast amount of due diligence. And we would always say, you know, if you want to finance your transaction at any point, it should be in your initial thoughts as you are planning the deal, not something you come to at the end of the deal. They're the deals that go wrong. They're the deals with delays. So I think, judging from your faces, that's probably enough law and finance for one day. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Oh, dear. Oh, come on, Barry. Yeah.
Side of things, yeah. Hello, Barry Howarth, Isle of Man. Just interested, some internet connectors and definitely the Isle of Man, as well as having the power, it has a fibre cable. Do you see any conflicting issues with the telecoms requirements you've got to adhere to and the power cable, or does one take precedent, you know, is one more important than the other or whatever? Yeah.
It's a good point. I mean, certainly the projects that we've worked on will, in the electricity space, always bundle fibre optic, but it's generally subservient to the electricity. So I've not seen a project that is trying to sort of actually straddle both regimes at the same time, the fibre optic for sort of, you know, telecom industry use and electricity use. But I can see that there would be some conflict should you try and do it, albeit it's a really good idea because it's exactly, you know, this sort of coexistence.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for the technical issue at the beginning. So, last question.
Yep, good morning. Craig English at Briggs Marine. Thanks for that. When you were talking about SPVs and insolvency remoteness, I'm assuming you mean an incorporated SPV or an unincorporated?
Sorry. Yeah, that's exactly what we mean. So, as you come into the project, what you don't want is a company that has loads of other non-project related obligations, because it means that, for example, if they've entered into a contract with somebody else, that person could then petition for their insolvency on the basis of them failing to perform that contract, which kind of infects this project. What the banks don't want is anybody else interfering with their borrower. Is that an answer?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. Okay, the next presentation is from Sarah Einan, Improving Island Resilience through AHA 100. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. We're going to continue the delivery theme this morning. And I'm also going to follow on from the introductory session that the Minister did yesterday and Robbie McGee, where they showcased the examples of essentially the collective agenda, collaborative agenda that we have in Scotland to reach our national connectivity goals. I'm going to be taking you through today the progress of the R100 programme, which admittedly is a terrestrial fibre network, but I want to highlight some considerations when deploying in Scotland's rural and island communities and showing that these are challenges that can be overcome in delivery to deliver a diverse and resilient fibre backhaul, which is key for all aspects of connectivity. So firstly, what is R100? R100, or its full title, Reaching 100%, is a Scottish Government initiative to bring faster broadband to communities where it's not commercially viable to deliver. So it builds on the previous work of the Superfast Broadband programme and targets rural and island communities, with these being some of the most complex and costly areas to deliver in the UK. Digital infrastructure, as we all know, is a key economic enabler and is a critical part of the Scottish Government's ambitions for a fair, green and growing economy. Effective digital connectivity can ensure that our rural and island communities are an integral part of our economic, social and environmental well-being. The Scottish Government has a proven history in investing in this area and has a successful implementation of delivery plans. It's invested over £1 billion over the last 10 years in increasing broadband speeds across Scotland. There are two strands to the programme. There's the 3 R100 contracts that are being rolled out by our delivery partner, Openreach. The R100 contract build is delivering access to gigabit-capable infrastructure, so it's providing future-proof connectivity and resilient connections for the decades to come. We're also pleased to say that the speeds that those are reaching are 30 times faster than the original commitment. The aim is for around 113,000 premises to get delivery through R100, and that's expected to be delivered by 2028. We currently have around 70,000 properties that are benefiting, and when you include that with the additional premises that Openreach are picking up on the way along, we're far exceeding that target. Just while we're focusing on the premises, it's also important to focus on the fact that we're extending the core network, increasing it into these rural areas and delivering really once-in-a-generation opportunities, which other industries, other part of the telecoms network can build off. So again, it's not just focusing on the end premise, but also looking at that network capability. There's also another part to the R100 programme, which is the Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme, and that offers a subsidy of up to £5,000 for eligible homes and businesses who are not part of the public subsidised contracts. We've had a really great response from the sector and from properties as well, and we've got over 4,900 properties that are using the vouchers to access faster broadband and a range of technologies, whether fixed wireless access, satellite, and combinations with FTTP as well. I should add that we're not stopping there. The Scottish Government team are in the midst of a number of procurements in support of the UK Government Project Gigabit programme, That's with the aim of extending gigabit broadband across the UK to have full coverage by 2030. And this will build off the infrastructure that's been put in place through the Superfast programme and also that with R100. So just turning back to the R100 programme and something that's a little bit more relevant for today. During the course of 2022, we had vessels out that were laying a total of 16 new subsea cables that connecting 15 Scottish islands. This is in addition to the 20 subsea cables that were also put in place through the earlier Digital Scotland Superfast broadband programme. And I should add that the laying of those is managed by our delivery partner Openreach. However, where Scottish Government has played a key role is developing and leveraging the relationships with its agencies to bring to the front the discussions of how the benefits and the investment in the local islands communities will have greater good than just providing connectivity. We're going to come on to some of the case studies we're going to be sharing about the work that we've undertaken in Scottish Government to really help extending that broadband network. Before I do so, I just want to give you some facts and figures, always handy to get a little bit of context. We've had quite a range of subsea cables, the longest being the one between Sandy and in Orkney to the Shetland mainland cable. That was 224 kilometres or 139 miles. Then we go to the other extreme, which is the shortest one that we had from Lismore to Scottish mainland, which was 1.4 kilometres, which is just less than 1 mile. So you can really see the range and scale in terms of what we've been doing here. A key decision for the programme and for the delivery of these cables was that we got ahead of the build, given the challenges that we know with subsea cabling. And a lot of the activity took place in 2022, and this really paved the way for then the connection happening on the islands. In some islands, we have full fibre access in place, and others, they'll be coming on board with all to be completed by 2028, as I mentioned, to create a really resilient backbone for Scotland. We're now going to come on to the challenges and opportunities. We can't shy away from some of these, so let's talk about some of them that are particular for island communities. I'll start off with a very general one, which is just about roads on islands. They're more limited, they're narrower, and you can't always work on them and actually use them at the same time. And you'll see here a particular example being a single track road, which is obviously very common in island communities. And that impacts local residents, with often the roads needing to be closed. Weather plays a major role, not just in Scotland, but particularly in island communities as well, and on the broadband build. It can often impact build plans in terms of the conditions that the engineers and the equipment are operating in, and also access to the islands, whether we can get the equipment and the engineers over there, sometimes by plane, but mainly by boat. And again, those ferries can be cancelled because of the weather. In addition, the tourist season poses quite a big issue for us. You may imagine, obviously, summer is the best time to build. It's also the time when accommodation is full. And the engineers who are out there need a place to stay. And that can cause us actually unforeseen complications in terms of being able to carry out the build. In addition, the landscape and the wildlife bring an extra layer of complexity, both in terms of how the delivery takes place, but also particularly when. An example that we have just now on the island of Tiree is that engineers are basically racing against time to complete their build before the rare corncrake, that's a type of bird, by the way, another bird species return to breed in spring. And obviously nature doesn't wait for any broadband deployment build. The key thing for this, and we'll come on to some of the examples, and we've seen this on Tiree, is really local collaboration and engagement. I mean, it's how that is coupled with some of the elements that the previous talk by CMS gathered in terms of all the legal elements. That local collaboration is really key. And the example on Tiree is where we've been working with Tiree Community Development Trust to understand the range of issues, but also the practical ways that we can overcome these, and particularly, as I mentioned, the timescales. One challenge that we have experienced, and it was really interesting to see that mentioned in Ailsa's presentation there, was and it was mentioned actually yesterday by Robbie McGee in his presentation, was the unanticipated encounter of basically bombs and torpedoes. That's not one I expected in this when I joined the broadband programme. In July 2022, there was a survey ship that was out and it detected a torpedo while it was scouting. This was in South Rawlensea, Flotta route, and it was basically everything was temporarily halted. The team knew that something was there. You know, they detected some magnetic vibrations on the seabed, but that could be anything from, you know, an ordnance to a shopping trolley. Who knows what you find in the sea? Further investigations were carried out, and it was confirmed it was an unexploded ordnance, and specifically a torpedo. And the investigation vessel informed the authorities straight away. A 500-metre coordinates was put on, and the MOD divers came up and they evaluated the situation and did a controlled explosion. All well and good. Let's move on. No, actually, further along on the seabed, there was also a hand grenade as well. That was 80 metres from the beach at the landing point in Flotta. So again, the authorities were informed and dealt with, and all personnel was dealt with safely. But I think that just shows a really good example of the unknowns that we come into, but also the linkages, I think, that are there with those relevant agency authorities to come and deal with these issues. Turning to the opportunities, Scottish Government teams worked with Openreach to visit islands and speak to communities to explain the build process, but also to recognise what connectivity will mean for these communities. We, through the programme and the investment, only actually fund the build infrastructure. It's not the final connections. And obviously, this is what makes a difference to be able to have the benefit and the impact that connectivity can bring. So the engineers actually go out to engage a lot more than they would than urban areas. Usually, if you're deploying in an urban area, you can do repeat visits. It's easy to go back out, but that's not the case in rural areas and particular islands, where if you need repeat visits, well, that delays connectivity. That delays getting online and making most of that investment. Our approach, and I'll give you an example that we've done in Lismore working with Openreach, is actually doing it all at the same time. So Openreach created an online facility where islanders can register for their service without commitment. Then the engineers went out and did a new ways of working where they delivered the final connection at the same time as they were actually delivering the original build, and then you minimise the time between the order getting placed and actually being able to get online. And that's had massive benefit for the Lismore community. They were previously struggling with less than 10 megabits per second, and now they've got full fibre connections and same speeds as many urban areas and major cities. I'm now going to dig into a couple of the particular examples, again, just to add a little bit of colour, but I think show the art of the possible in relation to working with communities, but also working with Scottish Government and its agencies. The first one is Fair Isle, and it's the most remote inhabited island in the UK. I could give you some kilometres and miles, but I think that the best way to say it is it takes 2.5 miles to travel there on a boat, whether you come from Orkney or whether you come from Shetland. It takes a long time to get there. It's got less than 50 properties on the island, but there is obviously an influx for tourists as well. The Fair Isle is served by the R100 subsea cable that stretches from Shetland to the Orkney Islands, and it's got a branch that goes off into Fair Isle. And I'm pleased to say that this cable was built 2 years ahead of schedule, using what is believed to be a world first, with Openreach deploying an innovative engineering solution that boosts the signal strength due to the distance that is needed between the islands. It's really a kind of super-powered adoption of technology that you don't actually but you actually do get in many homes. It's really taking what we've seen in homes and applying it in a new situation. The other first was the route represented the greatest distance that Openreach had transmitted a full fibre signal anywhere in the UK. The programme really is looking not only at delivering innovative end usage in terms of what the premises can do with connectivity, but also looking at innovation and how we deliver. It was the very first full fibre repeater in the UK, and it uses technology from modified from Nokia to be delivering. And as I say, it's as we understand it, to be the first in anywhere in the world. We had a number of partners involved in that delivery, Subsea, CGU, 23 Degree, and BK Marine. But one of the key elements for us was our work with the National Trust of Scotland. The island is a protected island, and it's run by the National Trust of Scotland. And this is due to it being the home for rare nesting birds and contains habitats of scientific and conservation value. As a result, we had to work very closely with the National Trust of Scotland and carefully plan the activity. But as you will see from the slide, the impact of having full fibre is expected to keep the island and the island community alive. Moving on to one that I've already slightly mentioned, which is Tiree and Iona. I'll take Iona first. Iona, both these islands are on the west coast of Scotland and in the Hebridean Islands. And what we saw, I mean, Iona is the cradle of Christianity of Scotland. It's been in the history books since St. Columbus established a monastery on there back in the 6th century. The build passed a number of historic monuments and through areas where there was high potential for archaeological remains from the prehistoric, pre-medieval and medieval period. Again, this is where planners had to work really closely with National Trust for Scotland, who cares for the island, Historic Environment Scotland, and other specialists on critical archaeological and environmental assessments. As well as the ancient heritage that's on the island, again, it's a rare and elusive breeding ground for this corncrake. It's a word that you've never heard before, but already you've heard it 3 times in this presentation, and you might be looking up what a corncrake is. It's a special type of bird and something that we really try to preserve. I also mentioned before about the work that's been going on in Tiree, and as you see here, the transformative impact it has had on the community, as confirmed by a head teacher at the Tiree High School. And again, it's a different aspect where we're removing the solitary elements of island life and providing that link to the wider world. And can't underestimate the value we see in communities about retaining people and keeping, again, that island community alive for years to come. Final one that I've got here is our work in Papa Westry, which forms part of the Orkney Islands. And this one is not really a part of the broadband network per se, but I want to show you here the art of the possible if you engage with communities. So what we did here was use drinking water pipes to deliver faster and more reliable broadband. We did this thanks to the voucher scheme part of the R100 programme. The work was funded by the scheme, again, as I mentioned before, for eligible homes and businesses up to the subsidy value of £5,000. And we worked with a local provider, CloudNet, to essentially run the cables through drinking water pipes to minimise disruption on the island. This is a unique alternative to digging up roads, and as we understand it, again, a UK first. The result that is all the businesses and residents in Papa Westry now receive comparable speeds, and better speeds than less rural areas in Scotland. So my aim with this talk has been to show you the art of the possible in Scotland and the Team Scotland approach to overcoming challenges and really tackling things head on and leveraging our links with agencies. I think also the only reason we can do this is because the shared view that connectivity and the impact that it has for Scotland is something that we should all be working towards and making that our common goal. If anyone would like to pick up on any of these examples or talk about our wider work on R100, please get in contact through the details here. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Time for one question, one or two. Aaron?
Yeah, thank you very much. Great presentation. Just to, not so much a question, but just to pick up that we were heavily involved in the R100, and we had the pleasure of going to every one of those islands where we met with the local fishing industry. and dealt with route clearance and making sure that the cables all went ashore. But I think there was 36 cables altogether, 20 in 2017.
Yeah, the 20 and then the 16 on top of that, yeah. I mean, there's so many parties involved in this. Yeah.
Yes, it was so important, you know, to get the local community on board and get the clearance for the route for the cables to come ashore, you know, with local liaison.
Yeah. I think where we've tried to use local businesses, they have the local knowledge, the contacts, they understand what's going to come in. We've worked with Openreach now for a number of years, and they've got a lot of inbuilt experience, but there's a lot of smaller providers who are doing this day in, day out for a variety of sectors as well. So that's made the difference for us, particularly in trying to get ahead in some of this delivery as well. It's, as I understand, it's most complex and largest deployment in the whole of Europe in terms of a broadband programme. That's all well and good in theory, but it's got to be delivered as well. And I think that example there is what makes the difference for us.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, next presentation is the TRSG report from Chris Woolley.
Good morning all, Chris Woolley. I'm not actually chair, I'm co-chair of the TRSG, very ably supported by somewhere there Alex Riddell. Can't see him, but he helps me a lot. There he is. Before I go on, I'm just going to say a word about our chairman. Well, no, Steve and I go back a long way from the old Cable and Wire Marine days, and all I can say is you've been an absolutely brilliant chairman. I know what it's like. I did it myself. We've worked together a lot, and I just want to say I wish you well in your retirement. And thank you, Steve. You've done a great job. So I'll try and work out this technology now. We've got a very good membership profile. I've managed to drum up at least one more member during this week. But if there's anyone here in the audience who's not represented and wishes to come on to the TRSG, you're very, very welcome. So, you know, if anyone wants to join us, contact me through Clive, whatever, and, you know, you're very welcome to join the TRSG. As you can see, we've got a very good profile here of all sorts of companies, but more input is always very welcome. In terms of meetings, we have managed to get things ramped up a bit, so we're meeting a lot more. We've had a couple of Teams meetings, and we had a very, very successful face-to-face meeting in Leeds just a few weeks ago, very well attended, and we had a very, very good representation and input and discussion topics. I think Alex is still working on the minutes, but shortly to be issued. And we do have a Teams meeting coming up later this month. So again, if anyone wants to join in, you're very, very welcome. And we'll set up a Teams link. Oh, I should say also that Alex, again, he set us up on a WhatsApp group, I think it is. And I think you're still setting up the LinkedIn thing, aren't you, Alex? Yeah. So we're trying to improve the communication mediums as well, so that we can get better sort of access. So what are we working on? MMO sort of draft model conditions. That's almost complete. So what we're doing there is trying to see what does come in from the MMO, what is good. I'm not going to be rude here. What is not so good? I'm going to put it that way. We see some very strange draft conditions coming in, which we have to push back on fairly firmly and politely. But we do see some quite strange things coming in, and we also see good stuff coming in, but there's a whole range of conditions that do come in, but what we're trying to do is put together a set of sort of fairly typical draft MMO conditions which one might see and which we're happy with, but also put some in there that perhaps you might see that we would normally push back on, to give better inform the members as to what's happening. OSPAR, well, we put some work into the OSPAR papers. I know I did, and I know others have it too from the TRSG to help John go back to OSPAR and get the BEP updated. And we put some input into the UK Parliamentary Inquiry, which John, I know, is just about to issue, if you haven't done already. Done. Yeah, so thank you, John. But so, yeah, we're quite active. I won't go too much onto this, but we do keep a watching brief on various countries, trying to understand who our contacts are and what's happening in various countries in terms of regulatory issues, etc. We do see a lot of change coming up, changes of contacts, people going off sick, retiring, etc., as some of us are trying to do all the time. But we do try and keep a close eye on it as much as we can. And again, that's working also with John, because John's got a very good contact base there, and so we're always trying to keep up to date with who we're talking to. Technical, so Marie, I won't talk too much about net gain because I know John's covered this off very well anyway. Benthic characterization is pretty similar. UXO, I'll come on to that in a minute. One of the issues which a few of our members have asked us to cover in more detail is horizontal directional drilling. Why? Because we are seeing a much more congested landing situation. So an HDD can cover a lot of issues off. It can also be a bit of a nightmare as well. But in terms of environmentally, can we go under something rather than through it, like a sand dune? Very, very sort of sensitive environmental area. So can we go under it for one reason, or is it a very dynamic environment? We'd rather go under it than try and put a cable through it on a beach, say subject to erosion issues, whatever. Or not in this country so much, but like in the States, we used to do a lot for drilling underneath coral to get the cable out underneath it in the area where it wasn't an issue, rather than try and go through coral, which is obviously a very sensitive environment. So there's lots of reasons for doing an HDD, but one has to think about, have you got the land on the beach to dig a very big hole to put the rig in and get the mud receiving pits and everything else that's going on with an HDD. So it's not quite as simple as one might think, and it's not cheap. But HDD certainly has its place, and it's a technology that some of us are quite familiar with. Done a lot in various countries, Singapore, US, and more in this country as well. So a couple of our members have asked us to put some more thought into putting a paper together about HDDs, why you might want to do it, why you might not want to do it, what are the issues, what have you got to watch out for. I will say to the audience here as well, if there's any of you here that have got particular views on that, then very happy to talk to you about that. So Alex and I have been and again with John and Claire, working through some of the guidelines and working out what the TRSG can do in terms of the guidelines. Some are quite outdated. We do need to update them. We discussed it also in the EC the other day. So we need to put some thought into those. Rock placement. I've been discussing that with a few colleagues just recently. Way back, we did do a paper on rock placement. We call it rock placement, not rock dumping, by the way, or I try to. But I know with Richard Hill there in the audience, we were just discussing it last night. But yeah, so we're looking at updating it, and also with Anya as well. I know that Anya's got some thoughts on this, and we're going to get together and talk about that. But rock placement has a big place, not just for power, but for telecoms as well, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And archaeology. This is just coming up more and more. and I know I've been saying it a long time, but we're going to put together an archaeological guideline, because various countries, jurisdictions have some quite varying requirements, from the extremely strict and proscriptive to I don't care. But we see it from all ranges. But one thing that any developer needs to think about is the archaeology much earlier in the project timeframe, right back from the desktop study, whatever one might call it, because it's coming up more and more, and if one doesn't consider it, then you can get horribly tripped up later on. If you've done a survey but not to the specification that some countries may require, then you might have to go out and do another one at huge cost. So, you know, one needs to think about these things before you even think about putting a ship in the water. So it's really important, and countries are placing a lot more emphasis on this, some more than others, but I'm not going to name countries to name and shame, but it's an issue that's coming up, and we do see stuff. The trouble is with the higher res survey equipment we've got these days, we find things that we didn't find a few years ago. So then, you know, we're sort of we're digging ourselves into a bit of a hole, but that's the situation these days. So we've got to think about archaeology much more, and we do see things. So, you know, something we got to put together as the TRSG. With the power over the telecoms guideline, the reason I put this in is what we're seeing now is a lot of power cables, be it interconnectors, exports, or array cables crossing over telecoms. We're the same industry, but we're not in some ways, in that when the original crossing guidelines were put together through ICPC et al., the ships we used in those days were a lot less capable than we've got now, as was the subsea equipment. So typically the power operators, or the power cable layers, do want to come much closer to a telecoms cable with their equipment for extremely good reasons. But what I'm saying, and I've got two hats on here, I work on both sides of the fence, is that we have to educate our telecoms side of it in terms of what can we do, how close can you get with a piece of equipment, be it a plough, a big subsea trencher, etc. And what medium do we put between those two cables? So it's usually a mattress, whatever, but and then what do we do afterwards with the rock placement? So there's a lot to think about here, and we need to really get together and sort of collectively educate ourselves in terms of what can we do, what is possible, what is not an issue anymore. If I go back, we used to say a plough had to be recovered 500 metres away from a telecoms asset. We can go much closer than that with the DP systems and the underwater positioning. We can get very close without any big risk from one to the other. So there's a lot of stuff that we can do now, which is much different to how it was contemplated when I was, you know, the cable venture with DP0 versus now we've got DP2, DP3. Sorry, dynamic positioning capability systems for those who don't understand DP. But the venture didn't have a DP system. It was sticks. That was it. So, you know, the situation today is a lot different to how it was a few years ago. So we need to look at that and update things. And again, I've been talking to Richard Hill about this, and we'll work together on that. So, MMO model conditions, UXO guidelines, again, I've been talking to Anya about that, and we're going to talk about that. Yes, and I've seen a lot of UXO in my various guises, including a torpedo right next to Cantat 2, so yeah, I've seen a torpedo as well, and phosphorus bombs and all sorts, but yeah. Spatial seabed awareness, congestion, of course, we're seeing a lot more of, you know, the sorry, John's giving me a bit of a hurry up here. I'll go quickly, but we're all aware of the spatial constraints we're seeing these days with wind farm, all sorts of things going on. Lastly, and I've put it up here as just a very quick point. John and I have been talking. We're going to try and do like a technical bulletin, opinion notes, or do we want to call it something else? So what we're trying to do here is just a very, very short opinion piece, which we'll try and put on LinkedIn or something. So if anyone here in the audience has a particular subject matter issue they want us to cover from the technical regulatory side, just in a short opinion piece, then what we'd like to do is try and put that together and put out a bulletin or whatever we call it to the wider membership. Because we think that's important to try and keep things moving in the right direction. So that's all I've got to say. I don't know how much time I've got for questions, Clive, but I haven't. But if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards, then yeah, very happy to do so. But thank you all.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, next presentation is from Andrew Drews, the RPSG update.
Thank you very much. So mine will be a bit shorter because Chris already mentioned quite a lot of topics. So, yeah. So first of all, I'm just starting with the guideline status within the RPSG. So, oops, that was one too much. So the power cabling handling guideline has been published. You all got an email a while ago and probably have now very good bedtime reading. If there are any comments on that, just let me know. So I'm promising you now for 6 months and now for the next month that the RPL guideline is coming soon. There's just a tiny bit to do, but then we can also issue that one. So then now here I'm doubling Chris, and where we have one of the topics where we need to have an alignment, and this is on rock placement. So Matt has been doing quite a significant amount of work on rock placement and the impact on the marine environment. So this is ready now for review within the RPSG, and then here we will also align with the TRSG and also with Richard Hill, who is thankfully now guiding everything with regards to crossings, together with Chris Willie, how we can put everything properly together. So there's a little bit of sorting what we have to do. So then actually this slide has not really changed that much since the last one. Oops. Since the last RPS, since the last update, except that everything with regards to rock placement moved to the first slide, because that part has been finished. Thanks, Matt. We are still stuck a little bit with the guidelines for the cable spacing, for the treatment of the out-of-service cables, and also for the monitoring of the cable burial depths. So we will see how this is processing this year, but I hope that we are able to kind of remanage maybe a little bit how to tackle all of these topics. So, and then we have had a meeting within the RPSG to have a look what our key topics are supposed to be. So all of the members of the RPSG were allowed to make proposals. What do you want to talk about in 2025? What is important to you? I do not want to say that we are now all swapping to new topics, but it was a little bit looking into a growing RPSG and having new members there, having especially a whole lot of new members coming from TSOs. So what is your interest and what do you want to get out of the RPSG? What do you believe? What is missing? What should ESCA tackle? And it was quite interesting to see. So this is basically a ranking. So the feedback were all of these topics that we have collected up front. So the topics are around dynamic cables and fatigue, then getting our guidelines sorted and updated. So also the RPSG is seeing that there is quite a lot of work to do this year to really keep everything up to date. Then cable integrity, and then how to get learning in the industry. The Next Gen group is already a very good vehicle for that, but there are also other means. And strategies to become more nature positive, and then UXO strategy. These were the topics what have been proposed, and everyone was basically allowed to rank it. What is most important for you? And so for 2025, the first 3 were selected. So number 1 and number 3 will be put into one topic, everything around cables. And then the second one, getting the guidelines sorted, this will also be a focus for 2025 for us. So, and we will have this tackled at our next meeting in presence. So I do not really know why this is always acting like this, but it doesn't matter. So also we are going to have a meeting in presence this year. So we will meet by the end of April in Amsterdam. Originally it was planned to meet in Berlin, but unfortunately the tenant office is flooded there. So we needed to swap the locations. And yeah, the main topics for these 2 days or for these 2 half days will be the guidelines and everything around cables and how to move on with this topic in 2025. We meet every 6 weeks for about an hour, every Thursday, 2 o'clock Central European Time. And yeah, if you like to join, just join. We have also, you've seen that Chris already has been showing that with regards to communication, the TRSG is moving towards WhatsApp and LinkedIn chat. So we give it another try. So we will try to make better use of the SharePoint that we have, so that we are really moving all of our activities into the SharePoint, so that we are not digging up emails anymore, and that we have really all of the materials of our work at hand at one point, so that everyone can see it directly. And what we basically hope is that we have a better organization and can keep track better of our priorities and tasks. So I'm feeding the planner right now, and I really like it that the planner is sending out reminders to everyone automatically, and I don't have to do it. It's just perfect. So for the members, it is of course a good thing that they can time independent collaborate. They do not need to meet, so they can do their stuff on the SharePoint. So, and we are really elaborating and trying all of the other fancy functions, what this SharePoint is going to offer, or what we think what could be beneficial for the members that we can really work quite nicely on a digital platform together. I guess it will be quite some trial and error, but yeah, that's the way how it goes, and we need to find our way through that, to all of these tools what can be used. So, yeah, here we are. This is the end of my presentation. Especially with everything around cables, we are seeking new members. Everyone else is also welcome, don't worry. Yeah? So, but with our focus topic in 2025, it would be really nice if we can find a few more members who can help us with everything around the electrical and mechanical topics, cable installation, monitoring during operation and maintenance, to move here a little bit. So, thank you very much. That already looks like we're going.
Okay, thank you, Anya. Next presentation from Dan Duckett on the decommissioning working group.
Are we using the clicker? I don't know. Yeah, okay, cool. Hello, everyone. This is going to be short and sweet, so hopefully you all appreciate it this morning and don't have a heavy head. So yeah, we've still got a very strong engagement from all 21 of our members at this point. It's really good to have you all present on every meeting that we attend. It's super engaging and really quite energizing at this point. We haven't had any additional new members, so if you wish to join, feel free to come along. We are fun, even though the topic isn't. So, but yeah, so if you have an interest or any concerns, please just reach out at this point. So in the last 6 months, We've kind of maintained our quarterly commitment to meetings at this point on the decommissioning group. Our last one was in October. We were meant to have one in the last week and a half, but that got sidelined, unfortunately, so we failed in the last month on it. Yeah, we will continue quarterly meetings at this point to keep any issues and ideas ongoing at this point. We attended the Subsea cable recovery workshop. That was done by Simon along with John at this point, which was a great collaboration with TCE, DEFRA and DISIT. So, yeah, we're still waiting on any outcomes at that point from it. It was a great presentation outlining how cable recovery is done, just to give everyone a great idea and understanding of how it is actually done. We're still working on our guidelines and recommendations at this point. They're all in review. There's not much to add to that at this point. We're just still reviewing them at this point. Hopefully in the next... Oh, God, this formatting is awful. This was not me. Hopefully in the next 6 months, we will have Recommendation 8 updated and published on the ESCA website at this point. Really hoping that we do get it out as soon as possible. And yeah, this is our main goal at this point. But I will say, as a sort of request, prayer and hope, that if you do have any decommissioning questions, queries, challenges, anything that you're encountering in your companies or hear about, please just reach out to us to, 1, make us aware, but also 2, see if we can help as well. We're always happy to engage, discuss, talk about ideas. So, yeah, though not that you can see any of our emails other than James's and Simon's. So mine's behind the concerns at this point from the formatting. So, yeah, I know, it's very, very tactical at this point. But yeah, that is me at this point. So, any questions? Good. I'll just...
Okay, next presentation is from Bob Willis, DC. Hey, Bob.
Do I need to go back? I think it's got the previous... Oh, maybe I need to go forward. Oh, that's like in the middle of the presentation. There we go. That looks like it. Thanks, Clive. Okay, good morning, everybody. That's me. I'm Rob Willis, part of DSIT, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. I actually based in Edinburgh, so I work over the tracks at the UK Government Office, Queen Elizabeth House, also reside in the Scottish borders. And I've seen a corncrake on South Uist. I think Sarah must have left. So there you go. An unremarkable bird. Looks like a partridge with a longer neck. You hear them more than you see them. So to actually see one is quite an achievement. And it's purely by accident. here today to talk about MPEX 24 and incident response, joining up telecoms and subsea cables. MPEX, nothing fancy, it stands for Emergency Planning Exercise. 24 is the year that it was done, although it was actually done in January, so just to confuse everybody. Just to rewind a bit, DSIT, I know there's part of a gang who were part of the conference, Ptolemy George, Peter Bristow, Anna Bouchard, and Felix, I believe, who's a new joiner to the team. So you may have come across my colleagues over the past day or so. We're effectively not so new kids on the block. We was formed about, I think we just passed our second birthday. We came from other departments and other agencies. So currently we are the lead government department for digital infrastructure. That bit came from the digital part of Digital Culture, Media and Sports, DCMS, as it's known. And we cover telecoms, public networks, the internet services, broadband, internet infrastructure, and subsea cables, of course, hence here today. And that covers, as a team, we cover sort of security, the sort of cyber risk side, high vendors, and economic resilience and investment from people that we might not want to see investing into the sector. Obviously, in terms of legal, the Comms Act 2003, and more recently, 2022, Telecom Security Act. And we also look at natural hazards and risks set out in the National Security and Resilience Assessment. As part of that, we do incident management. And of course, we're in Scotland, and we work very closely with all the devolved administrations. Just a few words about how we engage with the telecom sector. We've got something called the Electronic Communications Resilience and Response Group, ECRRG for short, and that's our sort of primary interface with the sector in terms of getting intelligence and communicating, particularly from a resilience point of view. And we're also, that group is responsible for something called NEAT, National Emergency Alert for Telecommunications, which is a sort of response tool mechanism where we get all the operators together and parts of government. And that is a way of looking at mutual aid, spreading situational awareness, and that feeds into COBRA and the COBRA unit and any COBRA meetings that might take place. All of the above lets us, we have an MPEX, we have an annual exercise that lets us sort of test all these tools and mechanisms that we've got for the sector. ECRRG, some crossover with members of the audience today. We've got Vodafone, we've got Google, BT, part of ECRRG, and there's probably others that people might be representing today. Talked about NEAT. This is a sort of high-level process. It's a way of getting operators all together, and it feeds into sort of COBRA and any sort of coordinated stuff that Whitehall is doing to incidents. Storm Iowin, we fed into that, and the operators provided sit reps, so we could do that. So, moving on to MPEX. Tabletop exercise was designed by ECRRG. I'm very pleased to say we had help from ESCA, John Rottlesey and Chris Webber, BT, if he's in the audience. Big thank you to you both for helping design the exercise. Virtual exercise, we had 3 of those NEAT calls during the day, a sort of open dialogue throughout the day. We got the operators to provide sit reps, 3 of them during the day, and we had a hot debrief at the end of the exercise, which took place on the 15th of January. So this is a sort of, was an example of how we're sort of collabing, I think that's the buzzword, isn't it? Collabing with the subsea cable sector. We have, for a few years, recognised the need to have some sort of incident response mechanism, similarly to what we're doing in terms of the ECROG and NEAT with the telecom sector. So bringing all yourselves together as part of an incident response. So we've been working on that for probably the best part of a year. We do have something called a National Emergency Plan for Subsea Cables, which is, I believe, now baselined into version 1.0. So that's something that you may have seen in draft, or certainly you'll see more of in the near future. We've set up, we already have in place a Subsea Cables Industry Group, which you're probably familiar with or even part of that. That has an incident response working group that's working on the putting together this plan and the response arrangements. So we thought this exercise would be a great opportunity to look at that joint work, collabing that we're doing with the two sectors. But it gave us, nevertheless, a great opportunity to test the NEAT bridge and looking at the sort of content of the plans that we've got and seeing how we could improve those for the future. The scenario then, I think sometimes scenarios do detract from exercises because people look at the scenario and think, well, that can't happen, and you know, if this happens, such and such can't happen. But so this is the scenario. I thought I'd show it to you because it's probably very of interest. We had a case, and it's inspired by real events, this, because as you're probably familiar, in 2002, October we had basically community isolation in the Shetlands where a cable was damaged, which meant there was no broadband internet, no fixed line connections or mobile connections. So very much based on that, we brought Orkney into it as well this time to make it slightly different. And I think Sarah's left now, but that R100 cable, unfortunately, there's a fault. The repair vessel that came in to repair that severed other cables. So effectively, you've got a sort of community isolation happening in both Shetland and Orkney. That sort of carried on into the next day. We're looking at sort of Christmas time to give it a bit more flavour in terms of the challenges. Further damage because of storm activity, trawlers dragging their anchor, so you've got more cables out. And now you have, rather than limited services in those islands, you've got complete sort of outages. So exacerbated during the day by the fact that the actual repair is going to take quite a while to sort out, and lots of red herrings. You know, you have things like Russian warships just happen to be escorted at the same time, and this is more of a challenge for us because we have to report to ministers, MOD and press lines and all sorts of things like that to make sure things like that are not connected to what's actually happened to the cables. And if you remember, the actual real Shetland incident came on the back of the Nord Stream attack by a couple of months. So obviously there's all this sort of conjecture happening that it was a sort of a malicious attack. And of course it wasn't. It was a bog standard trawler. So that was the exercise. So what are we looking at in terms of what lessons have we identified, how we want to improve things? I think first and foremost, it was a great opportunity to bring those two worlds together, telecoms and subsea cable representatives. And it shows you the need that we do need to have a sort of coordinated response, which we're starting on. We've got a plan now. I think we need to look at the actual logistics of joining that up. How will, members of that incident response group be part of NEAT calls? We need named individuals. we need to put those on the NEAT activation list, for instance. So more work on that to finalise it and get it all nicely well-oiled, if you like. From a telecoms perspective, we want to explore some of the contingencies that were sort of brought up as part of the exercise. You know, that's using enhanced satellite capabilities, backhaul, if you like, using the technical term, so that the mobile sector, for instance, can use that to function to limited extent. Power subsea cables was interesting because I think SSE brought up the notion that you can actually use power cables because there's fibre in them. But something that we need to explore. So if anyone wants to, during lunch, anyone's got any ideas on that, if you're from SSE or DESNES, then have a chat with me. That would be most appreciated. And I think the moral of the story is that, so we can do workarounds, we can do contingencies, but basically until that cable's been repaired, that is the first and foremost priority. And until that's done, you're not going to get anything looking like business as usual. So, you know, that needs to be sorted. And obviously there's mechanisms within your own organisations and what we're trying to do with the incident response group for subsea cables to make that happen faster and better. Exercise report should be out soon, hopefully next week, and we can make sure that that finds its way to you somehow. Okay, that's me done. So happy to take any questions. We'll be around for lunch. So,
any questions, Rob? Aaron?
Thank you. Yeah, it's just to say that on the Shifa incident, since that incident took place, a lot of people weren't aware that there's French trawlers work up west of the Shetlands. And since the incident, ESCA has done a great deal, such as converting Casorca into the French language, which has now been distributed by their fisheries consultant, which is Courtney there. And me previously, since this incident, there's a lot of work taking place to sort of alleviate that happening in the future. And even next week, we're meeting with the French fishing industry just to make them aware of the cables around Shetland and Orkney, which they weren't aware of in the past.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Yeah.
I'll go to Ptolemy. It's also worth noting, Aaron, of course, the situation was dreamt up. There were no cables cut in error or anything like that. So it was what we dreamt up as a situation. So just in case anyone wasn't sure.
Thank you. So, Ptolemy from DSET, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who has contributed towards developing the exercise, supporting the various DSET industry groups, helping the development of the National Emergency Plan for Subsea Cables, because it is just not something that we can do in isolation. I think one of the best things from the exercise, it just really reiterated the fact that nothing really happens in isolation, and there will always be opportunities for us to connect together when it comes to potential disruptions. And we as a government are always looking at ways that we can support the sector, whether that is the sharing of information, the connecting of industries, but just fundamentally just grateful for how cooperative everyone has been as we pull this together. And I'm always welcome with kind of feedback or additional kind of exercising that people be interested in seeing. And we're keen to kind of connect it through other departments and get more exciting and more disruptive as we plan our way through the various incident responses when it comes to subsea cable disruption. So yeah, basically a massive thank you to everyone who's been supporting this massive initiative.
Yeah, got time. Tony?
Hi. I've been installing some of the inter-island power cables and things about 30-ish years ago, not that long ago. You may or may not be aware that many of the inter-island power cables also had fibre optics inside them. but they were never approved for use, and so they were never terminated at the pole. So you might find that by climbing up the pole and opening up the junction boxes, you've already got fibre optics in there that you might be able to use, albeit 30-odd years old. But even the newer ones, I suspect, as well.
Yeah, that's really good news, I think, you know, as a potential to, as a contingency. So it's something we need to definitely follow up. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Okay. Next presentation from Elspeth MacDonald on a SFF update. Ah, there you are.
Good morning. I'm Elspeth MacDonald from the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to come along today. I'm just going to rearrange things slightly here and speak to you about our industry and just set out some of the challenges and opportunities that we're dealing with at the moment. So just first of all, a few words about SFF. We were formed in 1973, so just over 50 years old. We are the biggest fishing trade body in the UK. And I think although the challenges are very different from those that were around in 1973, the Federation is just as relevant and just as much needed now as it was back then. This slide here just shows you how we are constituted. We have 8 constituent associations within our membership, and they're shown here on this slide. Some of them are sort of geographically based, such as the Shetland Fishermen's Association and Orkney Fisheries, but also some of them are more fleet specific. So the Scottish Pelagic Fishermen's Association, the Scottish Whitefish Producers. But they're all wild capture fisheries. We don't cover anything to do with aquaculture, nothing to do with fish or shellfish farming. So we're often described as the last of the hunters. And vessels within our membership really come in all shapes and sizes. We represent a very broad section of fishing vessels, from under 10-metre inshore boats, probably sort of one-man operations, or in some cases one woman, right up to big pelagic offshore trawlers, sometimes as much as 80 metres or more. And we don't represent all fishing vessels in Scotland, but we do represent the vast majority of the catching effort in the Scottish fleet, and most of the Scottish quota holdings. And there's lots of different ways to catch fish in Scotland. They're just listed here. Sometimes people think fishing is quite straightforward, but there's lots of different methods that are used, everything from static gear, things what we call creels, often called pots, and traps, right through the different types of demersal trawling, single trawlers, pair trawlers where you've got 2 boats and 1 net, and twin trawlers where you've got 1 boat and 2 nets, and the pelagic trawlers, which are midwater fishing, so they're catching fish that are up off the seabed and are in midwater, the big shoaling fish like mackerel and herring. So obviously most of these types of trawling have got, fishing, even the static gear, have got various ways in which they could be impacted by structures and other materials in the sea, and also by the way that various policies can develop. So just looking for a moment at some sort of statistics about the industry, we get these statistics from the Marine Directorate, from the Scottish Government. They're always a bit in arrears, so they sort of produce them usually in a sort of autumn for the previous year, but this is the 2022 one, just because I couldn't find a nice infographic for 2023. But it shows there what our top 3 fish species are in terms of landings and value, and they're mackerel, which is one of our biggest pelagic fishery, nephrops, often known as prawns or langoustines, and monkfish. They were our top 3 commercial species in 2022. And you can also see there at the bottom of the slide, it shows that in 2022 we had 2,038 registered fishing vessels in Scotland. Of about 75% were smaller vessels, under 10 metres. and about 25% were bigger vessels over 10 metres. And we had just over about 4,100 fishermen who were employed in the industry, and over 80% of these were in regular employment, so it's not just seasonal fishing. And we've had some statistics. The statistics have been produced for 2023, and you can see there that the number of vessels has decreased slightly since 2024, as has the number of fishermen. And I think that does show a sort of gradual decline that we've seen over the last few years in the vessel numbers and the numbers of fishermen employed. But I think it's important to remember that that doesn't necessarily mean that there's been less fishing effort. It may be that we're seeing a trend towards the same amount of effort maybe being undertaken by just a smaller number of vessels. But it is a trend that we note, that we are observing. So where are our fish landed? Well, as you can see here, they're landed really all around the Scottish coast. These are the tonnages landed in different districts, different ports in 2022. And you can see there the importance of places like Peterhead, Fraserburgh, Shetland, sort of on the east coast and the North Isles, but also that really all round the coast there are ports where landings of fishing into these ports, and that might be it might be, for example, shellfish, crabs into Orkney. It might be lobsters into some of the ports in the southeast. It might be prawns into the west coast, all very different depending on the different fisheries that take place in these areas. And this then just shows that same data, but in terms of value, in terms of tonnage. So you can see there that really some of our big ports are fishing is really important to them. Peterhead is the biggest whitefish port in Europe, but it also has quite significant landings of pelagic fish, of mackerel and herring, as does Lerwick up in Shetland. And Fraserburgh is the biggest port in the UK for shellfish landings. So again, I think this helps just show how the sort of local economic importance of landings into these ports really matters all around the Scottish coast. I'll just pop this slide in. This is one that the Scottish Government uses in what they call their National Performance Framework. It's one of their national indicators of how Scotland is doing as a nation. And it's one of their environmental indicators, and it's about the percentage of commercial stocks that are fished at sustainable levels. And you can see there that that DIME series started off in 1991, I think it is, with only about 30% of our stocks being fished at sustainable levels. But you can see that sort of upward curve over the last 30 years. We're now in the early 2020s, we're at 70%. So I think this helps to dispel the notion sometimes that we're not fishing sustainably, that there's overfishing is a big issue. And I think it's important to look back at that period in the 90s and the early 2000s when we did have a fleet that was far bigger than the resources that were available for it to catch. And there's been really significant change and consolidation in the industry and decommissioning of the fleet in maybe 20 years ago. And now we have a fleet that is much more matched to the resources available to it. And while there's still obviously a bit of work to do, I think it shows a really positive picture in terms of how we are progressing. So just a little picture here of the UK EEZ that'll be familiar to you all in your industries, the envy of many fishing nations. Scotland accounts for I think it's about 63% of that EEZ, and similarly the Scottish fishing industry is about 60-odd% of the UK total. So we are very fortunate to have such tremendous resources in our waters. And I think also this slide shows quite clearly why fishing was and indeed remains a very contentious issue in the Brexit negotiations. You can see what the loss of the EEZ would mean to the EU. So our industry's come a long way, but I think a lot of challenges remain. It's a modern, efficient, and now highly regulated industry. We've got safer vessels, better trained and better equipped fishermen. But I think it's always important that we never forget that there can be a very high price to be paid to put fish on people's plates. And of course, we're not the only fish in the sea. This is an increasing challenge for us, what we call the spatial squeeze. And it's about how fishing is being impacted, how it adapts to those spatial pressures that come from either the development and the expansion of other industries and other sectors, but also the development of policies, for example, around nature conservation and how the impact that that might have on the fishing sector. So we've done some work to have a bit of a think about what this might look like in future. I'll just pop this slide up here, which shows the current expectations around offshore wind expansion in Scottish waters. This chart here shows sites that are either already operational, under construction, in the consenting process, or pre-consenting in Scotland. And you'll appreciate that from our industry's perspective, this is not a pretty picture. This causes us a great deal of concern. We understand the importance of energy transition. Of course, we understand the need to move away from an energy system based on fossil fuels, but we absolutely don't want our industry to be the inadvertent casualty of that. So we commissioned a piece of work back in, I think it was 2022, to look at this, what we call the spatial squeeze on fishing. And we did this at a UK level, so we did it with our counterparts in the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations in England and Wales. And we looked at these different sectors and how they might change over time and what that impact might be on our industry. And we looked at 5 different scenarios, and I'll just run through them. So we basically looked at the past, when I think the yardstick was the year 2000. We looked at the present, which would have been 2022. And then we looked at 3 future scenarios, one of 2030 and 2 scenarios in 2050. So that was the past scenario, and you can see that there wasn't really much restriction on fishing at that time. We had the oil and gas industry in the UK waters, aquaculture, very much an active industry in Scotland around the coast and in the islands. And we had some areas where there were trawling restrictions, but very little. When we move that on to the present scenario, which would have been in 2022 when we did this, you can see there that the colours are beginning to build up on the chart. There's this great nature conservation area to the west of Scotland, in the north, the Deep Sea Reserve. We're starting to see the establishment of offshore wind farms. Oil and gas is well developed. We've got a lot more aquaculture sites, including things like the beginning of seaweed aquaculture, which are potentially, in future, I think, developments that could take up quite a lot of space at sea. We have aggregate dredging, not so much in Scottish waters, but south of the border. And we have things like wave and tidal energy, which are becoming more. They're still small scale, but there's clearly ambition and a keenness for development of them in future. And then if we sort of project forward to 2030, and obviously this is having to some extent be a bit of crystal ball gazing, but it is not, these are not just sort of conjecture. This work was done by ABP Mer, reputable consultants. It was based on the best information that was available at the time. And you can start to see how these restrictions might start to build up that would impact on fishing. Expansion of offshore wind farms, how many of them will be built by 2030, we don't yet know, but there's certainly a lot of ambition. We start to see fishing restrictions start to be brought into areas that are designated for conservation, whether that's marine protected areas or certainly in the case of English waters, highly protected marine areas. We don't have them in Scotland, but we have a huge network of MPAs that are yet to have their fisheries management measures put in place. We've got oil and gas, obviously maintaining the same sort of footprint that it has for a number of years. And I say we do expect to see quite significant expansion of seaweed aquaculture on potentially quite large spatial scales. And when ABP Mer then sort of projected ahead to 2050, based on what was known at the time, you can really see again, how this starts to crank up, how you start to see those spatial restrictions on our industry. And we then looked at another 2050 scenario, which we sort of considered to be the worst case scenario, where it was essentially, to some extent, the same spatial footprint, but more restrictions in place. So making assumptions, for example, that there could be no fishing in offshore wind sites. And that is concern, that is potential reality in relation to the floating offshore wind sites because of the cabling. The subsea cabling is likely to mean that it will certainly not be possible to undertake any mobile fishing in these sites based on how we currently understand it. And this scenario here also included, what the impact would be if the quarter of a nautical mile buffer either side of a subsea cable was included. So again, you can see how the constraints on fishing start to become pretty challenging. And if you were trying to run a business thinking, in all of these areas, I can't actually fish. And of course, we can't just necessarily just go somewhere else. There's all sorts of reasons why it's not just simple to take your fishing operation to another place. So when we looked at the different, the sort of relative contributions of those different activities on fishing in these different future scenarios, it was evident that offshore wind and nature conservation were the ones that would contribute the greatest spatial constraint. But in that most extreme scenario, in that 2050 scenario, you can see that dark green dot of cables and how that could have a really significant impact on fishing, where that, as I say, quarter of a mile buffer zone either side of a cable to be applied. So decisions in future can have a really significant impact on what the effect on our sector is. So the report drew a number of conclusions. Very obviously, we all know that the demand for marine space is increasing all the time and expected to continue. I touched on this point about displacement. We think there's really significant displacement effects that we don't yet understand. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of planning activity around where you might put wind farms, where you might have nature conservation sites, but very little understanding of what is the displacement effect of that. Where do these fishing vessels go? Remembering it's not just the UK fleet or the Scottish fleet, it's the Norwegian fleet that get permission to fish in our waters, it's the EU fleet that can still fish in our waters, it's the Faroese fleet that can fish in our waters when they're given permission. And fish aren't uniformly distributed in the sea. We fish in the areas that we fish in because that's where the fish are, and that's where it's efficient, economically viable for us to fish there. So I think at best, displacement risks us becoming less efficient. And in some cases, it actually, I think, brings some existential risks. Inshore, for example, it's very hard for inshore vessels to go and fish somewhere else and to do that efficiently because they're limited in where they can go. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done on really understanding what the impact of all these policy decisions and development in other sectors is on our fishing industry. A number of recommendations were made in the report. I mean, these are, kind of common sense in lots of ways, and some of these things, we do have earlier engagement on things. We have sort of better engagement in lots of ways, but I think we still feel very frustrated in our industry that we seem to be expected to be the thing that has to give for something else. So we think there's still a long way to go in terms of government policy, government decision making around, it can't just always be the case that fishing has to make way for everything else. So this slide here just always sort of makes me think, which is at greater risk of becoming endangered? Is it our North Sea cod, or is it actually our fishermen? We put a great deal of effort, time, effort and resources into protecting and sustaining our fish stocks. But I think we must make sure that we treat our fishermen and fisherwomen in some case. A young Erin here from Malig, she's about, I don't know, she's maybe 20 now, keen as mustard to have a long-term future in the industry, a great advocate for the future of our industry. But we need to treat the people in our industry with the same care and attention as we do our fish and the environment. We've been doing a lot more work in SFF around really trying to highlight that this industry is about people as well. Yes, it's about economic activity. Yes, it's about putting food on people's plates. It's about producing high quality, healthy, sustainable protein, but it's about people, and it's often about people who've been in this industry for generations and want to be in it for future generations. So we're trying very hard to sort of tell these stories, to really help the public understand that this is an industry full of people who are committed to it and want to be there for the future. I think just also important to recognise that fishing is also an important part of how we reach net zero. So we understand that offshore renewable energy and all the cabling that's going to come with that is an important part of the energy transition and the route map to net zero. But fishing is also part of that, because when you compare the carbon emissions from production of fish, wild-caught fish, to other sources of protein, you can see that we are starting from a very different place. We are already efficient in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. In Scotland, we've got some tremendously efficient vessels. So we can do that by knowing where the fish are, being able to harvest them efficiently, having modern vessels, because our industry has been successful and has been able to invest. But if our industry starts to become impacted by being displaced and becoming the profitability starts to reduce, then you start to reduce the ability of our industry to produce that same food efficiently. So our message to government very much is, yes, we understand the route map to net zero, but we have to be part of it for everybody's futures. So thank you for listening, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Elspeth.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, there's, yeah. Thanks very much for the presentation. Rhys Ambrose here. I'm one of the MSG co-chairs alongside Courtney. And I just wanted to say, thank you for the presentation. Also, just to note, the message of collaboration between our industries and yours is definitely one we're working on. And we've had really good engagement, especially from the SFF and your sort of constituent members and associations, and lots of things we're working on in terms of work streams we've got, including the fishery liaison guidelines and the information exchange workshops have been really helpful in building relationships between the industry and hopefully educating both sides on the divide on how best to work together. So I think it is a hopeful step at the moment. I know we've got very positive working relationships at the moment too, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've got strong working relationships, and we certainly want to build on these. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Rhys. Tony?
Hi, Tony Zemelka. Interesting stuff. We can't do much about the green encroachment of everywhere for whatever reasons. But for many years now, I've been suggesting that if we had a pragmatic approach on both sides, from the fishermen and from the developers, that we could actually work together by having the right sort of fishing within wind farms. Now, I'm not talking about demersal trawling there, or even pelagic trawling, because that's potentially dangerous. But there are certain types of fishing that could easily happen and be encouraged even within the wind farms. And the wind farms, the way they're built, there could be a financial saving there from the developer. So it could potentially be a win-win solution if it's done properly. And you need to be, both sides, get together, be pragmatic and see what can be done.
Yeah, there's, what we see already in Scotland is we do see that where we've got fixed bottom wind farms, so when they're fixed ones rather than floaters, some fishing has returned to these, some mobile fishing has returned to these, but it's significantly less than was there in the past. And there have been some trials. There's been trials at an experimental, or one of the demonstrator sites of the small floating developments in Scottish waters, where they have demonstrated that it's been possible to fish in that area with static gear, with pots. But that area was previously a mobile fishery. It was a mobile fishery, a haddock fishery, a productive one. So again, yes, it might be possible to undertake some forms of fishing, but it's asking essentially our industry to change what we do. And that's not just straightforward overnight, because you have to fish for the things that you have a license for, you have to fish for the things that you have quota for, you have to fish for the things that your boat is designed for. So to be able to say, well, we could do a different type of fishing, possibly yes, but the actual practicalities of that and whether these businesses would continue to be profitable and viable, I think remains to be seen. And I think we have worked closely. We spend a huge amount of our resources in SFF and also of our constituent associations working with wind farm developers and with trade bodies. And, you know, we've done a lot of work in the last year or so with ORE Catapult on floating design and actually looking to see, you know, are there designs of floating wind farms where it would be possible to continue fishing? And we have, well, certainly our conclusions are no, we just can't see that in the way that those floating sites are going to be developed. I think the other thing that's important to note in relation to the floating sites in Scotland is they're going to be pretty far offshore, a lot of them, and not necessarily well suited to fishing with static gears, etc. So in some cases, there will be scope for fishing to return to some of the wind farm sites, and the report made those assumptions around the fixed sites. But I think we're talking about a very different challenge around floating. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I can't see who it is.
Hi, Robert Sawstead. Thank you for the slides. When I looked at the spatial squeeze report, I think, I may be wrong, but I think the numbers for offshore wind added up to 4.3% of the UK EEZ for offshore wind, and then a sort of a much larger number for MPAs. So I just wanted to put that into context, that it's 4.3%. And I appreciate there's 4.3% badly placed and there's 4.3% less badly placed.
Yeah, I think that's a really important qualifier there, because one of the great frustrations we've had is that the selection of sites has not, from our perspective, sufficiently taken fishing into account. And we're now beginning to see this play out, because we're beginning to see now environmental impact assessment reports coming through from those sites that are going through the consenting process, and they're beginning to set out the impacts of their developments are likely to have on fisheries. And they're localised, but they're not insignificant. Yeah. So choice of site is absolutely key, and that's where early engagement is really important.
Okay. Got one more. I can't see who it is.
Hiya. There's quite a lot of focus in your slides about the infrastructure that's going in and how restrictive that is on the activities of fishing. But what's the consideration of how the installations are going to, because they're restricting the fishing activities in those areas, has there been, what is the understanding of how that's going to impact on the fish stocks? And because it's not going to be just a restriction in the fishing in that area, that's then going to impact on the stocks that are there.
Yeah, I think presumably. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important point, and I think one of the things that concerns us further is that offshore wind, in particular, I think is a great big experiment. You know, we don't know what the environmental impact of these structures is going to be on marine food chains. We don't know the environmental impact or the biological and sort of physiological impact of electromagnetic fields, for example, on marine life. We don't really know what physical impact they'll have on the oceanography, if you like, of the North Sea basin. How much is it going to change the physical processes? So there's a lot of research work going into this, but it's all large. Well, a lot is largely modelling. It's largely sort of thinking about what things might be in future. From our perspective, it's not going quickly enough to answer a lot of these questions. Sometimes folks say to us, oh, well, fish like structures in the sea. You know, they sort of aggregate around structures. That would be a good thing. You know, well, we don't really know, because fish might aggregate around these structures, and that might mean that you get increased biomass that spills over out into the surrounding areas that might produce more fish to be caught. But we don't know that. It might not be the case. It may be indeed that fish actually stay within the wind farm structure because they like aggregating around these turbines. So you're absolutely right. There's biological, physical, sort of environmental impacts that I don't think we understand at all well, and it's quite hard, therefore, to predict what effect there will be, not just on fish stocks, but also on other marine life.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Elspeth. We've got coffee break until 11:30, so I'll see you then.
got any good jokes for this morning? Are we doing the... No. Haven't got time. But you have to go and do what you have to do tonight.
Okay. Okay, welcome back. Next presentation is the MSG update from Reece and Courtney. So, pass over to you.
Thanks, Clive. Hi, everyone. So my name is Reece Ambrose. This is Courtney French, and we're the Maritime Subgroup co-chairs. We'll just give you a quick update on all the work we've been doing and some of our messages from the MSG today. I'll try and make it nice and quick. So first and foremost, our usual message, Kizorka. This is one of the main things we work on the MSG. And just to remind people that one of our key messages of ESCA is we believe in by promotion of cable awareness, you improve the safety of lives of all marine users, and in turn also benefit our cables by reducing the chance of cable faults. So one of the key things we try and encourage all our members to do is to not only submit all their data to the Kizorka project, but also remember to check its update, make sure your emergency contact details are up to date and relevant. As you can see there, we have very good uptake on our numbers on the page, and we also, alongside the Kizorka web map and the plotter files, we also have the Kingfisher Bulletin, which has been spoken about over the last few days, and we encourage everyone to take a look at the Kingfisher Bulletin, sign up, and you'll start getting alerts for your area of interest of all the hazards and what's going on in the area. So it's a great function. And that's just, again, really, really emphasising the message. Please do go on and check your information on there. And if there are any problems, you can contact Seafish or ourselves, and we can help you with that. So what has been going on in the MSG? So this is my attempt at an AI-generated image of Courtney's port tours. It's a very nice car. You see, I'm not very good at AI. For some reason, the fishermen are on mainland Europe rather than in the sea. But they're obviously expanding. Watch out. Courtney conducted port tours last year. Those are all the places she visited. She'll be organising more this summer. So please, any suggestions for where to go, please let us know. If members have a particular area that they wish to have greater engagement with the fishermen, greater cable awareness, please come talk to us. We can sort it out. Like I said, and then, Courtney will be on her way.
In a not-so-jazzy car.
Alongside that, there's also the exhibition. So Seafish visit various skipper expos on behalf of Kizorka to give out Kizorka plotter and also promote the project. And also there's the Seafarers Conference in Limerick on the 20th of March, which I believe Courtney will be attending. Yeah, so she'll be there. Again, promulgating the Kizorka data set to all, as many as possible. So what have we been doing? One of the main activities we've been doing over the last 12 months really is creation of the fishery liaison guidelines for linear cables. We are now in the final stages of this process. We have got the final draft of the document that will be submitted to both the ESCA EC for approval, as well as varying fishing association boards, as well as government bodies such as DCIT, DEFRA, for their approval. And once we have that board approval, we'll be looking to circulate the document to the wider group and have it as an established best practice guidelines for use in the industry. And there'll be a launch event for that in the late spring, though we do hope to have the document out as soon as possible so that our users can start making use of it and getting the benefit of it. This is just an example of one of the key diagrams in the document. We've tried to get some key messaging out there for both sides of the industry to understand when and what level of engagement and what type of engagement you should be doing to really establish good communication channels along the way. What I should say, I just want to, one of the key messages that we had along the process is earlier engagement with fishermen, the better. You can hopefully get a lot more productive discussions if you can involve them earlier in the process. And while that has always been a problem in our industry, it's one thing we're looking to really work together to see the best ways of doing that. I'll also just note, as through this process, we've been doing activities such as the Fishery Information Exchange Workshop, so in-person meetings with all our members and also the fishing associations. And that has helped to really improve relationships between the industries, and it's been education on both sides of the divide. And this is some of the feedback we've received so far. So I won't read all the bits out, but there's a couple of nice sentences in there as well. Really, they've just messages that they believe the relationship's in a really good place, and hopefully we can build on that for productive discussions across all projects as well, and in turn, hopefully reduce incidences between the industries. What else are we doing? So this is me talking nonsense on a beach in Bude. So we were working alongside John, producing the Cable Shorts videos. I will not be giving up my day job after spending 20 seconds in front of a camera. It's not for me for sure. So we've been helping produce those. We've also been working, and Courtney especially has been working on the Flow redraft, and they are looking to establish an executive committee to help drive that forward. Like I said, we've also held information exchange workshops. So we had one in York April last year, something like that, and one in Cardiff in June last year. And we'll be looking again to hopefully make these sort of annual events where we can get both the fishing industry and our members together and have various sort of topics and working groups to work through educational pieces. We also have regular-ish meetings of the MSG. If anyone would like to join, all are welcome. Just drop us a line. We tend to have mostly Teams meetings, so it's hopefully easy for most people to access. But yeah, please let us know. This slide would have been very helpful to have had prior to the panel discussion yesterday. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible, but it's just setting out some of the background information to that cable exposure discussion that we had yesterday. And the point I just wanted to touch on again is the real drivers for this and why we're talking about it. So the main driver is that publications of cable exposures are now being required in licensed conditions. So it's almost, we don't really have much of a choice there, or our members don't have much of a choice there. They will start to see these implemented upon them. Secondly, it is good practice, we believe anyway, to publicise your cable awareness, cable exposures. And also there's a further question of liability if you are aware of a known cable exposure and you don't notify it in some manner. Have you fulfilled your due diligence as an owner of the asset? And then thirdly, just a reminder that the hazard bulletin was not a suitable location for the long-term notifications where many of our members have been using that method to notify of cable exposures, whether short-term or long-term. A couple of options we've been exploring in the MSG, which maybe we didn't talk about too much yesterday on the panel, was of what we can do. So first one is the status quo. We continue as we are, individual members conducting cable awareness as they see fit, but we see a great variation in how they do that, and that can lead to some confusion on the fishing industry's part for not knowing where to find information. We could look at having an additional bulletin layer for cable exposures, and we could also host an additional place on the Kizorka website for holding, where members could submit cable exposure notifications if they wanted. So those are some of the options. The discussion there, again, was really covered yesterday. It's not a simple subject. It's extremely thorny, and I don't think we've really reached a clear decision on the best message in terms of clear messaging of, back to our core aim of promoting safety of maritime users at sea. In terms of our message should be clear and simple. You should not fish or operate anything to do with the seabed near a subsea cable because you are at risk of snagging, etc. And whether that cable was or was not exposed at any point is not necessarily relevant. So that is the main issues. Like I said, we had that good discussion in the panel. If anyone would like to let us know their opinion, we do want to hear feedback from every member, because anything we do as ESCO obviously is governed by our members. So please do get in contact with anything there. And then on to Courtney.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you, I feel like I've been giving you this update for the last 2 years about this ORGIP work stream, which feels like it's been going on forever. But we're actually quite close to publication of a few of the documents now, thank goodness. So it's basically ORGIP COEX projects as various work streams. So there's the stakeholder engagement, gear penetration study, and the survey and trial evaluation. So we're in the final stages of all of the documents. I think that they are due to be, we've got to have comments back to them, final comments back to them by next week or end of this week. Essentially they're doing final cut. To be fair, they have taken into account ESC comments in lots of the documents, which is positive. They've made the decision to not go forward with the at-sea over-trawlability trial, which is positive because we pushed back quite significantly on that. There was a legal liability review roundtable in London, which a few of us went to. It wasn't quite as beneficial as we hoped, but there were some positives that came out of it. So we do have a slightly better understanding of the legal liabilities, for example, of if you knew that there was a cable exposure and you didn't make it publicly available, then what is the liability if there was a snagging incident? So we do have a better idea of that, and they have got a write-up which will also be published after final comments on that. So hopefully these documents will be available in the coming months. I know I've been saying that for the last 2 years, but they should actually be ready. And then also, I sit on a PAG for the FishDomin, so it's Fisheries Sensitivity Mapping and Displacement Project, which was led by CFAS. Essentially, it's merging AIS and VMS data. It is a data gap because it doesn't cover under 15-metre vessels. But essentially, it's sort of given us a better idea of fishing activity, fishing density, and also they've utilised lots of different sensitivity indexes. So you can pick and choose which sensitivity indexes you want to utilise when you're looking for. It's meant to be more of like a leasing planning tool, but I suppose once you have a wind farm or if you're routing a cable, then it would also be useful to you. So it is available on the CFAS website. It is quite dense, data heavy, so the active interactive map is quite slow, so just be patient. There was an action to try and look at integrating IVMS data. So in Wales, IVMS, so for under 15 metres, is already in place. So rather than waiting for that to be in place in the UK, which has been delayed, they wanted to see if they could do a trial so that as soon as we start receiving IVMS data, then they can integrate it into this web tool. And then there was also discussions on, well, okay, this is great for now, but how do we make sure that the data is being updated regularly? Because I suppose after a couple of years, it becomes out of date. So it's a really good tool. It's definitely better than just AIS or VMS. But again, just highlighting that it is only over 15 meters and basically mobile gear vessels rather than static. And then I'm now going to give you a little FLO Fisheries Advisor update. So that was the MSG. This is just me as a fisheries liaison person. So there's a few things that I suppose is relevant that we should probably all be aware of. So better data, it's constantly on the table. How do we get better data? How do we utilize? There's always loads of gaps in fisheries data, and I think that's part of the problem with the spatial squeeze element, that actually we're not utilizing fisheries data when we're looking at leasing and stuff, because actually the data isn't good enough quality. So the Crown Estate held this workshop where the Cornish Fisheries Producers Organisation presented their data, which is actually, it's fantastic data, probably the best available for the UK at least. And I think that a lot of the other associations are looking to try and increase their data availability so that they also are able to provide as good a data. Obviously, this is mostly for the Celtic Sea, leasing around for floating wind. There's lots of interaction about floating wind and fisheries and how we can or cannot coexist. So basically, the improving data is very important. And I suppose from this, there's the fishing sector are calling to be statutory consultees. At the moment, they're not a statutory consultee. Every developer can consult with them as and how they wish. If they were a statutory consultee, they feel as though they would have more influence, I suppose. And also for the strategic compensation in terms of impacts on seabirds from offshore wind, one of the solutions has been an expansion of the MPA network. The fisheries sector are obviously frustrated. They're saying that it's more spatial squeeze, more displacement impacts, and actually, the NFFO have said that the fishing is in the firing line again. Were they consulted? Why were they not considered? How come we're not taking a holistic view and taking the fisheries sector as a key important stakeholder? So they're feeling the frustration. And then another one in terms of sand eel, which is strategic compensation again. So the sand eel fishery in UK waters has been closed to fishing. That doesn't directly impact UK fishing vessels because it's mostly Danish vessels that target that fleet. But the Danes have taken the UK. They've taken out an arbitration tribunal in January. The results aren't available yet, but essentially they're saying that under the UK trade cooperation agreement, it's not reasonable for them to close the sand eel fishery because it's had a massive impact on their economic viability of that fishery. And then just to highlight that there's the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, which is it's quite a big fund, and they're looking for innovation projects. Their focuses for up to 2027 are supporting the younger generation, similarly to how ESCA have been supporting the younger generation into the industry. So how they can acquire their own vessels, improving vessel efficiency, and measures to enhance safety and working conditions. And then one of the other, I suppose, innovation projects that has been getting quite a lot of media coverage at the moment is the disco scallops. So who knew that scallops would enjoy a night out in Pop World just as much as the ESCA EC? But yeah, so basically it's these pots that they have LED lights in and then they're attracting scallops. So they're already being marketed I live in Brixton, which is a fishing port. They're already being marketed in one of the bigger fishing restaurants in town, saying, you know, they're much more environmentally friendly. Apparently, they're less gritty. So yeah, I think that it's obviously if they're not using dredges to catch scallops, then there's less interaction with subsea cables as well, which is obviously positive for us. And then this is just a slide about quota agreements for the UK. Essentially, summarising this, I'm not going to go into loads of detail, but the UK have got more quota allocation than what they would have this year if they were a member of the EU. And then there's been quite a few things in the news about what a load of pollocks. So essentially there's zero TAC for pollock in the UK at the moment for commercial fishing vessels, but actually there's no restrictions on like rod and line fishermen, like recreational fishers. So a charter vessel landed 400 kilos of pollock on one trip. So how is that a holistic view to fisheries management? Seems a load of pollocks to me. And then this is getting lots of fisheries stakeholders are sharing this, and this paper it's come out recently. Basically, it's from somebody at the Plymouth Marine Lab. They've gone out and done questionnaires and asked fishermen for their opinion on offshore wind. It's purely questionnaire based. It's not factual. And I would say that it's very biased. They haven't communicated with any offshore wind developers. There's no information really on how there actually is fishing activity within wind farm sites. So they're on the gravy train of displacement, and the whole the offshore wind industry is here to absolutely ruin the fishing industry when that isn't actually the case. So I would strongly advise that maybe some developers club together and look at some sort of similar research project, and get a paper out there that demonstrates that actually there is still fishing activity taking place, and what developers are doing to try and collaborate and work with the fishing industry, because I think this sort of scaremongers quite a lot, and it's not real, but it is out there, which isn't ideal for our industries. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Reese. Unfortunately, we haven't really got time for questions, so we'll let you off. Thank you. Next presentation is from Steve for the EC review.
We could rush through that. John's done most of it. Okay, briefly, everybody. We're getting good coordination between our subgroups. I would like to take my hat off to everybody that puts time into ESCA. It is a labour of love, I think, for all of you. John pointed out we put in a sum of money towards the Valencia conference. I was there for the first night when on the opening evening I wasn't able to stay for the whole event, but Peter came out, and Courtney was there, and it was a good event. Yet another shout out, I'll say it, this is going to be the last time I say this, it's your organisation. If you've got problems in your country, you want things done, talk to your representatives on the EC or talk to the chairs of the working groups. They can't work on what they don't know about. Know who your committee is. There's a mistake there, Clive, I'm still on the list. For now. Okay. So, final thought from me, or a couple of final thoughts. 40 years ago this week, I set out on what was turned out to be the biggest cable repair in the world. 5 cable ships went out and picked up a whole of a transatlantic system and relayed it, took every repeater out of it, every new repeaters into it because of a design error, because of the simple things that engineers can stop. I don't think the industry could survive something like that today. So that's where we've gone in 40 years, and that worries me. What I am pleased about is there are so many people coming in, so many young people coming and learning from us, which is great. So that's my call out for that. And I would like to ask your opinion, your moment of your time. I'm not the only person retiring from ESCA at this meeting. Another gentleman is retiring as well. He spent a lot of time working for the EC. He's done a lot of work on recommendations. I'd like you to raise your hand, give your hand to Tony Zamelka, who's also going to retire. Well done, Tony. And with that, I'll get out your way so we can listen to Neil.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, next presentation is ICPC update.
Okay, so the eagle-eyed amongst you will spot that I'm not Ryan Wopshall, the General Manager of the ICPC, but I do have a role within the Secretariat of the ICPC, so I'm giving the update on his behalf today. So about the ICPC, it was formed in 1958 as the Cable Damage Committee and became the International Cable Protection Committee to take a more proactive view of cable protection rather than focusing on cable damage in 1967. It's the leading organisation globally for advancing freedoms to install and maintain submarine cables and mitigating risks of damage to those cables. So the ICPC has grown significantly. Just 2 years ago, we had about 130 members. We're now at about 242 members across 75 countries. So it's growing in significant size and stature, and particularly in the level of profile that we get around the world. It's important to note the ICPC is not an intergovernmental body. It is an industry group, but it has government observers as well as full members as cable owners, vessel operators and survey companies, and associate members from amongst the supply chain as well. We work with governments, other marine industries, international organisations and NGOs to promote cable awareness, cable protection, resilience messages, and publish the ICPC best practices to governments for cable protection and resilience. We also commission peer-reviewed research on the environmental impacts of submarine cables as well. So there's a mission statement, I won't read the whole thing, and a vision and a motto, which is sharing the seabed and oceans in harmony. And I think that's fundamentally the core principle of how the mission and vision work as well, in terms of coordinating with other marine users, understanding the scientific the impact the impact of submarine cables in the marine environment and what that means. So the ICPC envisions a global network of reliable and resilient submarine cables that coexist with the marine environment. So in May last year, in 2024, we had a very successful plenary, the most successful yet in Singapore, and it was well attended. We had over 200 participants. We had a keynote speech from Ambassador Rena Lee, who led the BBNJ treaty negotiations, for those who might have followed the BBNJ treaty for protection of the marine environment in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The plenary then was followed and held alongside a Law of the Sea Day, which was organised between the ICPC and the Centre for International Law in Singapore, which again was a hugely successful event, bringing together governments from across Asia, as well as Australia, UK involvement, and others from across the world. The Law of the Sea Day was a closed-door workshop. There was a published report afterwards, which is available on the website and on the CIL website as well. The report addresses Law of the Sea issues relating to submarine cables on various topics. And there were some quite structured panels with delegates from government, industry, academia, and others who brought together these topics. And a nice group photo of some of the delegates there. As we talked about yesterday in my update, the International Advisory Body for Submarine Cable Resilience has been formed. It's a 40-strong advisory body, and it's a joint initiative between the ICPC and the ITU. The first meeting took place in December, and that was very successful. That was an online meeting, which then led to the summit in Abuja, Nigeria last week, and the inaugural in-person meeting of the advisory body. The co-chairs are His Excellency Minister Bosun Tijani, who's the Minister of Telecommunications in Nigeria, and Sandra Maximiano, who's the chair of the Board of Directors for ANACOM in Portugal. And then, of course, the co-executive secretaries. It's a dual organisation. So we have our ICPC legal advisor, Kent Bressy, and the ITU Deputy Secretary General, Thomas Lamanauskas. So, as I've said, the advisory body itself is 40 members, including ministers, diplomats, industry, people from all parts of the submarine cable ecosystem. Then we have a very active executive committee. Some of the members of the executive committee are also part of ESCA and are here today. The EC meets in person twice a year, once before the plenary sessions, and then has a main EC meeting in autumn as well, and covering various topics on many different issues, from deep sea bed mining to biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, cable protection, topics like charting of submarine cables, and I won't read the whole list. We've also recently published 2 viewpoints on anchor drags and why anchors might be deployed intentionally or inadvertently, following some of the incidents and reporting and speculation on the Baltic, which we heard from Pete Jameson yesterday. And then the other viewpoint is on the importance of cable charting. So there's 2 new resources there which collect a lot of the information about how the ICPC views these topics. There's working groups on various subjects. So we have a media and PR working group, affiliations working group, a mining group, business plan working group, and the list is there. These cover specific topics and meet on a regular basis to address the priority issues within the organisation. And then some of the sponsored research projects that have been completed. We have a marine scientific advisor, Dr. Mike Clare from the National Oceanography Centre. He's presented a few times at ESCA, so many here might be familiar with him. We've published research projects and white papers for members on topics such as climate change hotspots, disturbance of carbon and carbon sequestration, and then volcanic hazards for subsea cables. And we have various other projects which the organisation works on to support the industry. These 3 white papers have specific provisions within them that give advice to cable industry members on cable protection and what can be learnt from some of these. And these are available exclusively for ICPC members on the members area of the website. So if you're not a member of ICPC, you can join and access a huge range of resources there. The UNEP WCMC report, many will be familiar with, was published in 2009, and this was a collaboration between UNEP WCMC, the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre, and the ICPC, and it was the most successful report that UNEP WCMC has published. Of course, in 2009, it was quite a long time ago, so there's a process to do a successor report to complement the existing report that covers what we understand and what we know about submarine cables and marine biodiversity today. But for this report, if you're not aware, it's available on the United Nations Digital Library, so do go and access and take a look at that. We also publish public-facing environment updates. The most recent one was on the unintended consequence of human activities and the impact of sedimentary regime changes as a result of human activities in the oceans. That's available from the website, so I'd recommend there's lots of resources there that cover topics such as fibre sensing, marine biodiversity, seismic activity, all sorts of interesting topics. So hugely valuable public resource there. And the 2025 plenary will take place in Montreal, Canada. That's in April this year. Abstracts have been reviewed and they're currently the agenda is currently being put together, so watch out for that. And that's set to be a great event in Canada. And then beyond 2025, we continue to grow. It says we have 242 members, but I think we've had about 6 or 7 new applications this week, so we grow on a weekly basis. Please come and join us. The ICPC is focused on tackling emerging issues on cable protection, so topics which come up and impact the global submarine cable industry we look at. There's close coordination with ESCA and with other organisations. It helps that I have a role within both organisations to bring some of these topics together. And the ICPC continues to look for ways in bringing younger professionals into the industry. And I think the organisation was really pleased to sponsor the ESCA Award, which was won by Anna Bladen, to come and participate in the plenary in Montreal. Looking forward, there's a 5-year strategic plan looking at the finance and budget for the things that we can do. With an increased membership, that increases some of the capacity of the organisation. So it's quite exciting times when it's in a period of growth. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Okay, thanks, John. Next presentation is from ESCA's legal advisor, Neil Bayliss. So I'll pass to you, Neil.
Thanks, Clive. Good to see you all again. I think this is a record day 2 audience for me. This is excellent. Just want to start by saying thank you to Steve and Tony. I've shared, I think, over 20 plenaries with them, been on the journey with ESCA from day one of its existence, seen the numbers in the room growing, seen the impact we've had on the industry and regulation expand, and these 2 gentlemen have made a massive contribution and will be sorely missed. So I personally wish them all the best for the future, and it's been great working with you guys, so thank you. At the end of the day, it's about people, isn't it? And that's what makes the organisation, so really great to have shared that with you. So here's my little run through of some interesting developments in the past few months since I last gave the update. There's been a lot going on. There's a common theme. You'll see at least 3 of these slides have a sort of geopolitical element. So we're seeing politics, I think, coming to the fore in a lot of ways. Probably less so for the first slide, just a reminder that the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act is now in force. This brings in a whole sort of new regime to regulate digital markets in the UK. The idea was that competition law wasn't working that well to govern the activities of big tech companies. So we now have sort of 150 odd people at the CMA looking at the big tech and sort of initial investigations, as you see in the bottom left there, Google, Apple and Google again. So in a few months' time, they'll decide whether they have strategic market status and whether they're going to be specific measures imposed on them as to how they run the businesses. So watch the space on that front. We've got changes in competition law, changes to the merger control regime. We've got new enforcement powers for the CMA when it comes to doing dawn raids. So I've upgraded the competition guidelines, which I'm sure you've all read, but they're bang up to date now. We've got the new consumer protection powers coming in April, which is going to basically mean that consumer law can be enforced in the same way as competition law, with fines of up to 10% of global turnover for infringement. So it's going to become a lot more serious for those consumer-facing companies to comply with UK consumer law. So again, watch the space for sort of the first decisions under that new power. We've got laws on subscription provisions coming in next year. That'll be the sort of final stage of the DMCC implementation. And yeah, that's it. Well, obviously, we'll see decisions coming through over the next few years on that one. Now, turning to the sort of first of the geopolitical slides, there's been a sort of major rumpus, if you like, at the CMA. As you know, the government called all the regulators in and said, what are you doing to promote growth? And apparently the CMA didn't do a very good job convincing the government that they were pro-growth. So Marcus Bockerink got the boot as chairman of the CMA, which was sort of the first time the politicians got involved in sort of who was leading the CMA in a long time, and replaced with Doug Gurr, who's had a couple of very senior roles at Amazon. So it's sending a sort of message to the markets that we're going to be more business friendly. He's coming out and saying all the right things about how the CMA is pro-growth. we're seeing a cut to the staff, result of a quotes budgeting error, but anyway, there's going to be fewer people at the CMA. They're currently just over 1,100 people at the CMA, so they're not under-resourced, but they'll be probably closer to 1,000 by the end of this year. We've had Labour calling for a sort of general review of all the work that's going on. The CMA is making sure we're not just regulating for its own sake. It's put a bit of a freeze on the CMA. They're sort of worried now about being big cedars, not acting in the interests of economic growth. We saw the investigations into the TV companies being looked at. There's a lot of other investigations which are sort of being put in the slow lane. There's also a new Growth and Investment Council that's been set up, again, to look at how the CMA could contribute to the UK's prosperity. So all these things coming together, meaning there's a bit of a crisis of confidence, I think, at the CMA. A number of people have sort of been leaving, which I guess for business is good. Less regulation is a good thing. Whether it's in the consumers' interests, I'm not so sure. Some other UK developments, I think some of these will be familiar to you. Obviously, the government's had a good new push at encouraging further investment into offshore wind projects, so streamlining the process for those approvals. Had the Vodafone 3 merger cleared. Obviously, lots of people from Vodafone here will know all about that, but that was, I guess, a good example of a more flexible approach on merger control. That was one which had a phase 2 review, but ultimately remedies were accepted. Really important sort of class action case. This was this action against BT, claiming that it had charged excessive amounts to the landline customers. Big sums at stake, and BT won at the end of the day. So again, sort of good news for the industry in that regard. Bit of a cooling effect again on some of these consumer class actions, of which there are dozens going through the courts at the moment. But effectively, interestingly, the court found that the prices were excessive, but they weren't unfair. Now, that's sort of lovely playing with language there, isn't it? But you could charge excessive prices as long as they aren't unfair. If you want to sort of find out more, go on the CAT website to see how they've conjured that one up. But obviously, it's making it a little bit harder potentially for people to bring similar claims in future. And then, as we know, we've got a new joint committee looking at undersea cables and the threats to national infrastructure, which I know we're obviously, Eska's just commented on. So again, watch this space for further government measures in that area. But it's great to see them sort of finally waking up to the importance of the cables sector to national infrastructure. Turning to European, non-UK developments, quite a lot, again, on the geopolitical angle. We saw some sort of counter-cyclical arguments being made in Norway, Sweden and France about the single European electricity market, which effectively was, the aim has been to sort of connect the whole of Europe's electricity market and then to allow prices to sort of basically move so that people who are producing electricity for less money can sell it to those where the prices are higher. But the impact is, I'm not an expert on economics or electricity regulation, but the impact is effectively that if you export loads of electricity, the prices will actually tend to go up in your own exporting country. So Norway, for example, the price of electricity were going up because they were selling lots of electricity to the UK. Likewise, Sweden, selling electricity to Germany meant the price of Sweden went up, and people in France sort of arguing that French electricity should be for French people, not to be sold to us Brits. So there's sort of nationalism stepping in to say we shouldn't have more interconnectors. EU still saying we want to give lots of more money to encourage more interconnection and make this a single market. So there's a conflict there, and we'll see how that plays out. But it's really kind of interesting to see how political this whole thing has become, which I think is sort of quite a new issue. No one would really have predicted that. Helpfully, the EC is playing its part in looking at resilience now, obviously as a result of the sort of the breakages that have occurred in the Baltic and elsewhere, which we know the likely reasons, but nonetheless politically it's being played up. So there's a lot of money being made available to strengthen resilience, potentially fund additional cables, invest in specialised EU-registered vessels for repairs, and to increase sanctions on those who are causing damage. So really interesting package being proposed there. Interesting to see how that plays out. But again, absolutely on the political agenda to do what it can to protect this key infrastructure. Again, looking at some EU developments, okay, we've seen this sort of cooling effect of geopolitics in terms of the EC's investigations into big tech companies. there's the sort of fear that there would be repercussions from the US if the EU was seen to be basically making life harder for big US companies. So the Commission is sort of treading carefully not to upset a certain gentleman in Washington, D.C. And so that, again, that's one to watch. I think there's difficult balancing act between protecting consumers but also not harming business and not damaging the international relations that the EU has with the US, which aren't exactly in a great position already at the moment. We've got a new EU Commissioner for Competition, Teresa Ribera. She put her statement out on the sort of key focus. Sort of renewable energy is high up the list there, which is great for us. And effectively, potentially relaxing some of the approaches to mergers to create a little bit more sort of European champions to fight the predominance of the Chinese and US global giants. There's also a new cooperation agreement between the EU and the UK, allowing for greater cooperation between us in terms of competition investigation. So, again, I think it's good that there's more discussion going on now between London and Brussels, which I think is generally healthy in terms of allowing for more effective regulation. And then finally, just on international developments, this slide sort of changes every day depending on what side of the bed Mr. Trump's got out of bed. But obviously we are seeing tariffs coming in. Most people predict this will potentially have an inflationary effect on raw materials. Obviously going to be countermeasures taken by China, etc., in relation to rare earths. So I think there's potential for trouble ahead. It might all be posturing, and we know that he says things and then backs down once he's got what he wants. So, but obviously it's potentially hugely significant for your kale manufacturers and other manufacturers of products that they might not be able to get the materials they need. And it creates this tension, which again sort of pushes against the collaboration, which I think is integral to what most of us in the room believe in. So yeah, that's my whistle-stop tour. If you want to ask any questions now or after or any time by email, please just give me a shout. I'll update you all in 6 months' time. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Okay, last presentation of the day before we finish. From Alistair, you here? Yeah. From Indeximate.
Yeah, so this is just a quick one, I think, just to try and bring to people's attention within with the ESCA group. Sorry, Alistair Godfrey, Indeximate. So this is with respect to some work that's going on with the GUH, the Global Underwater Hub. I don't know how much of that group you know, but essentially they've been looking at, there's a lot of kind of crossover in many ways between them and ESCA, which is something we probably want to discuss. But they've been doing some work on cables. They've got this white paper coming up looking at the performance and reliability issues of subsea cables. So we've had a little bit of influence on that. We're kind of poking fingers in little pies there. So that's Chris Minto, my colleague. But I couldn't help but thinking there's quite a lot of crossover between some of the stuff that Anya talked about earlier and this paper that's coming out. But really what I wanted to do was to say, this is coming out, I think, due the end of this month. There probably wants to be some input from some members of ESCA. So I'm kind of just raising that, and I think it was raised yesterday. So hopefully you are a little bit aware of it. But yeah, so that's it. So from our point of view, we are doing fibre optic sensing of cables, looking for issues that are in the cables there. So it's obviously in our interest, but we wanted it's not obviously just from a fibre sensing point of view. So hopefully you're aware of that. I don't know whether John might have any comment on ESCA and GUH. Any thoughts there? No? Are we all good? Okay. All right, so that was it really. So unless there's is any volunteers for to be looking at this, I'm just raising awareness of it. Okay, we all good? Okay. We'll get on to the last bit. Marvellous.
Okay, there's only one item left, and that's the date and venue of the next meeting. Some of you will know that where it is. Thank you. Just to confirm that the next meeting will be over the 17th and 18th of September. We alternate between UK and Europe for our biannual plenaries, so I'm pleased to say that we've been invited to go to Sicily from Polisavisi, which is very much appreciated, and probably get quite a good attendance in Sicily as well. So yeah, 17th and 18th of September. The following one, we don't have a host at the moment, but if anyone is interested to host, please contact me. It'll be about the same time next year, so that would be appreciated as well. So with that, I'm going to close the plenary unless you have any lasting comments. And just to say, could you leave your badges on the chairs, because it saves me doing them next time. So yeah, so thanks for coming. Hope you've enjoyed it, and safe travels home.